LoveLore Library. Chapter 892. It was a rare sight to see him suffer a setback. Ning Xuema's indescribable anger seemed to dissipate a little bit. Shenjiuli suddenly took a step forward. Ning Xuema couldn't help but take a step back. However, she looked up at him, unwilling to admit defeat. She didn't break the rules. He had already asked, so she didn't have to answer him. Stubborn little girl. Shenjiuli pulled her into his arms. Ning Xuema felt uncomfortable and couldn't help but struggle. Don't move. I'm just taking back my own little benefit. Shenjiuli looked at her. Their faces were very close. His breath lingered on her face. Ning Xuema closed her eyes. Take it. Wasn't it just another peck on her forehead and cheeks like a dragonfly skimming the water? She didn't care. Suddenly, something soft touched her tightly pursed lips. He said in a low voice, "Be good, open your mouth." Her nose was filled with the fragrance of pastries. She didn't open her mouth. Instead, she opened her eyes and saw that he was sending a piece of sparkling pastry to her lips. Ning Xuema suddenly felt wronged. She turned her face away. I don't want it. She lost. She didn't want this handout food. However, as soon as she opened her mouth, Shenjiuli stuffed the pastry in his hand into her mouth. She subconsciously wanted to spit it out, but his lips suddenly pressed down. His kiss was so strong that Xuema couldn't push him away even if she wanted to. Because she struggled, he held her even tighter. After he sent the pastry into her mouth, the tip of his tongue forced hers to dance together. The pastry melted in her mouth. The fresh and sweet fragrance was dense in their mouths. After a while, Shenjiuli finally let go of her. Ning Xuema suddenly took a step back. The pastry had already slipped into her stomach. It was strange that such a small piece of pastry made her poor stomach feel full. She glared at him, her heart thumping non-stop. She didn't know what to feel. She paused for a moment before saying, "All right, I've already exchanged all my bets for you." She turned around and left. Where are you going? Look for food. Ning Xuema replied stiffly. Her figure flashed out of the courtyard. She probably went down the peak. It seemed that she had really pissed her off. However, with her current physique, she could only eat one piece of this kind of pastry a day at most. Otherwise, not only would she waste the 1,000-year-old sealwort, but she would also have problems. This was also the reason why he had said that he would bet a piece of cake at the beginning. He had originally wanted Xuema to win a small round, but she had changed the bet. So for the sake of her life, he couldn't let her win no matter what. Of course, he could also explain all these reasons to Xuema. Firstly, he was too lazy to explain. Secondly, this kind of pastry had to be nourished in his storage space with telekinesis. He couldn't let her keep it by herself. So, Shenjiuli sat in the same place for a moment. He took out a sound-transmitting spell and connected Rongyue Tianlan. After a while, Rongyue Tianlan's dying voice came from the sound-transmitting spell, Di Zun, it's the middle of the night. Do you have any urgent instructions? I used the sealwort cake as an excuse to play chess with Xuema in the middle of the night. As expected, I managed to get some of her inner thoughts. However, she was a little angry. Of course, there were some things that couldn't be said to Rongyue. Shenjiuli not only asked some of Xuema's inner thoughts, but also took advantage of her. Chapter 893. Rongyu suddenly thought of something and asked, Dizwa, how many rounds did you win? How many rounds did she win? Shenjiuli paused and said, I didn't let her win, so she didn't win a single round. Rongyu Tianlan was speechless. No wonder the girl was angry. Anyone would be angry. He couldn't help but rub his eyebrows. You should at least let her win a round. If you really treat her as a disciple, it's fine even if you torture her 1,000 times. But if you want the girl to fall in love with you, this won't do. However, being angry because of this proves that she unknowingly cares about you. Rong Yu Tianlon chattered on and on with the sound transmission talisman for a long time, but there was no response from the other side. He was a little surprised and looked down. His head was full of black lines. He didn't know when the ancestor had cut off the sound transmission talisman. He had wasted so many sutras to pick up girls. Ning Xuemo ran down the heavenly sound peak and went straight to the kitchen. Although she didn't feel hungry anymore after eating the pastry, she still felt that it wasn't enough to fill her up. Sometimes, people mainly ate to satisfy their mouths. Xuemo felt that her mouth was still hungry, and there were some good food in the kitchen. She could get some to eat. If she had known that she couldn't win a single round, she wouldn't have wasted so much effort on him. However, Xuemo forgot that it was the middle of the night. The disciples in the kitchen were still resting and didn't open the door. She pounced on empty air. Looking at the closed door, she had no choice but to leave. She didn't want to go back to the heavenly sound peak at the moment. She wanted to walk around nearby. There was a lot of bamboo on Buddha Lotus Mountain. Bamboo forests could be seen everywhere. She wandered around casually and occasionally met the patrolling disciples of the Sun Moon sect. She was now very famous in the Sun Moon sect. During the last few rounds of the competition, many disciples of the Sun Moon sect were present and saw her skills. Therefore, almost all the disciples here knew her. When they met on the road, they immediately greeted her respectfully and called her Grand Marshal Aunt. She was speechless. It couldn't be helped. The disciples patrolling the mountain were basically the grand disciples of the ancestors' grand disciples, and Ning Xuemo was now the ancestors' direct disciple, so it wasn't wrong to call her Marshal Granduncle. Ning Xuemo had always liked to pretend to be young. Now that she was suddenly promoted to an ancestor, she felt like she was suddenly called Grandma on the street. She suddenly felt a sense of vicissitudes. She couldn't help but touch her own face, afraid that she would touch a bunch of wrinkles. Fortunately, her cheeks were still tender when she touched them, which made her feel a little relieved. In order to prevent others from calling her Marshal Granduncle a few times, she turned around and found a secluded place to wander around. In any case, they were in the Sun Moon sect's territory. No matter how secluded the place was, there wouldn't be any bandits or monsters appearing. It was very safe. After a few twists and turns, she arrived at a hillside. There was a large patch of xiangfei bamboo here, which rustled in the night. Ning Xuemo liked the fragrance of the bamboo, so she walked over. Her nose was filled with the refreshing fragrance of the bamboo. Ning Xuemo took a deep breath and felt that the inexplicable anger in her heart suddenly dissipated by quite a bit. When she thought about it carefully, her anger seemed to have arisen for no reason. There was no such thing as father and son on the chessboard. There was no room for compromise. This was what they had agreed on earlier. It seemed a little strange for her to be angry at him just because she lost a few rounds. Why was she becoming more and more petty? It really wasn't like her. Chapter 894. Ning Xuemo raised her hand to rub her forehead and yawned. After staying up for half the night, she was also tired. She was going to go back to sleep. Just as she was about to turn around, she suddenly sensed something and looked towards a small lake outside the bamboo forest. The small lake was not big and was surrounded by a bamboo forest. There were a few large rocks scattered on the shore, adding a bit of rustic charm to the small lake. On the large rock beside the lake sat a young girl in a lake blue dress. That young girl hugged her knees with her head resting on them. Her long hair draped over her shoulders and fluttered slightly in the wind. Ning Xuemo only saw her side profile, but from this side profile, Ning Xuema could tell her identity, Tian Xueching. Ji Yunhuang's future crown prince consort. Ning Xuema raised her head to look at the sky. Dawn came late in the winter and there was still some time before daybreak. Why did this crown prince consort not sleep in the middle of the night and come here alone? Ning Xuema noticed that Ji Yunhuang treated this future crown prince consort coldly, but this kind of matter was not something that an outsider could interfere with. Therefore, she did not ask. Now that she saw Tian Xueching sitting there alone, her back gave people a kind of miserable feeling. It was as if there was a faint sadness and loneliness spreading from her back. She couldn't have jumped into the lake, right? Ning Xuema looked at the lake again. She had been to this lake before and it was not deep. It would not drown anyone. Perhaps she was unhappy, so she came here alone to relieve her boredom. Ning Xuema was not a person who liked to meddle in other people's business. Moreover, she was not familiar with this Miss Tian Xueching. Therefore, she stood there for a moment before turning around to leave. Who is it? Tian Xueching was also a sharp person. She turned around to look in Ning Xuema's direction. Ning Xuema naturally could not leave at this time. She walked out from the shadow of the bamboo forest and smiled. It's me. Her heart skipped a beat. In her previous life, she was extremely proficient in the art of tracking. If she were to follow someone, almost no one would be able to detect her. In this life, her martial arts had improved a lot compared to her previous life. Naturally, her tracking skills had also improved a lot. Even Ji Yunhuang might not be able to detect her presence, but she did not expect that Tian Xueching, who looked so gentle and weak, would be able to detect her so easily. Looks like this Miss Tian Xueching isn't simple either. So it's Martial Uncle Ning. Tian Xueching also stood up and bowed. Her voice was cold and indifferent. It was as cold as her personality. Ning Xuema knew that she was addressing her according to Ji Yunhuang's seniority, so she nodded. I accidentally wandered here and didn't expect to disturb the crown prince consort. My apologies. Tian Xueching lowered her eyes slightly and said indifferently, Martial Uncle Ning is too polite. Martial Uncle Ning, if you don't regard me as an outsider, please call me Xueching by her name. I don't deserve to be called crown prince consort. The two exchanged some pleasantries before Ning Xuema took her leave. Her senses were sharp, so she could tell that this Tian Xueching did not like her. Her attitude towards her was respectful and cold. Although it was strange for Tian Xueching to sit here alone in the middle of the night, Ning Xuema did not ask too much. As long as the other party did not seek death here, she was too lazy to intervene. She walked out of the bamboo forest and turned a corner. Suddenly, she heard voices in front of her. She paused and raised her head to look. From afar, she saw 4 to 5 people walking over. These people were wearing the clothes of the Sun Moon sect's 3rd-generation disciples. There were both men and women, so they were somewhat conspicuous in the night. Chapter 895. Ning Xuema recognized one of them. It was the Crown Prince, Ji Yunhuang. He seemed to have drunk a little too much as he staggered slightly. A young girl followed closely behind him. 3rd senior martial brother, walk slower. It's fine. Ji Yunhuang pushed away the girl's hand. A faint trace of resentment flashed through the girl's eyes, but she smiled slightly. 3rd senior martial brother, why are you in such a hurry? Are you in a hurry to go back and see the crown princess? 3rd senior martial brother, why didn't you bring the crown princess over when you were drinking? You should have let the other disciples get to know her. 5th junior martial sister. Another youth called out to the girl, his tone faintly disapproving. 2nd senior martial brother, I'm serious. 3rd senior martial brother brought the crown princess here, but he didn't introduce her to everyone. Everyone wanted to get to know her. The girl retorted. Ji Yunhuang pursed his lips into a line and suddenly looked at the girl. Little fifth, must you mention her? His voice was slightly cold. The other girl smiled and tried to smooth things over. All right, if third senior marshal brother doesn't want to mention her, then we don't need to. Hey, there's a rock over there. Third senior marshal brother, be careful. Ji Yunhuang was obviously drunk as he tripped over a rock and staggered. Fortunately, the young girl who had warned him was quick and supported him in a flash. Third senior brother, be careful. She frowned slightly. Third senior marshal brother, you really drank too much. Why don't we go to the kitchen and ask for some hangover soup? Fourth senior marshal sister, did you forget? Right now, it's 2:45 in the morning. The kitchen hasn't opened yet. Fifth junior marshal sister reminded him. Fourth senior marshal sister patted her forehead and smiled. But I drank until I forgot the time. I actually forgot about this. Third senior marshal brother, why don't you come to my place first? I can boil some hangover soup for you. If you go back like this, I'm afraid madam will be unhappy. Ning Xuemo didn't want to meet them at this time, so when she saw them clearly, she flew up the tree and wanted to wait for them to pass by before coming down. Once she hit her tracks, it wouldn't be easy for others to find her. Moreover, this group of people already had wine, so they didn't expect someone to be in the tree. They were very daring. They went under the tree, and sure enough, they didn't find Ning Xuemo hiding in the tree. That's right. Fourth senior sister does have an excellent hangover soup. We all drank a lot of it tonight. Why don't we go there together? Fifth junior sister immediately supported Ji Yunhuang's arm from the other side and smiled as she continued, Third senior brother, it's better if you sober up before going back. Otherwise, that crown prince consort of yours will be unhappy and punish you outside the door. Speaking of which, that crown prince consort of yours has quite the character. That day, I spoke to her enthusiastically, but she only replied me with, Ah, crown prince consort. Ning Xuemo sensed something was wrong with her voice. Her heart skipped a beat and she looked towards the source of the sound. She saw that Ji Yunhuang's fifth junior sister had stopped, and not far in front of them, a young girl had appeared. It was Tian Xueching, who Ning Xuemo had just met by the lake. She was wearing a lake blue dress, her black hair fluttering in the wind, and her beautiful face. The dreary moonlight shone on her body, giving her a sense of loneliness and frailty. Sister-in-law. Crown Prince Consort. Everyone was just talking about this Crown Prince Consort, so when the main character suddenly appeared, they were a little embarrassed. Tian Xueching's attitude was indifferent as she nodded and greeted them, Hello everyone. Ji Yunhuang steadied himself and swept a glance at her. His voice turned cold, You followed this prince. Ning Xuemo couldn't help but facepalm. Did Ji Yunhuang drink until he became stupid? Chapter 896. Ji Yunhuang drank until now and came back. Now that he met his own crown princess, he accused her of following him. She could testify that this crown princess did not follow Ji Yunhuang because she had met her at the lake just now. Ning Xuemo leaned against the tree trunk and crossed her arms to watch the show. Your Highness is overthinking. Tian Xueching's voice was calm. Overthinking. Ji Yunhuang chuckled and his gaze gradually sharpened. Aren't you the best at following me? Tian Xueching's face turned slightly pale, but she pursed her lips and did not answer. No matter where I go, you will appear. Tian Xueching, must you be so persistent? Ji Yunhuang's eyes flashed with disgust. Tian Xueching's face turned even paler, but she still did not speak. She paused and stepped forward to support his arm. You drank too much, let me help you back. Scram! Ji Yunhuang, who had always been elegant, suddenly became furious. He fiercely swung his sleeve and a faint light was emitted from his sleeve. Tian Xueqing staggered and retreated a few steps. Tian Xueqing's face turned pale as she looked at Ji Yunhuang. Everyone saw that the atmosphere was about to turn stiff and hurriedly tried to smooth things over. Third brother, you really drank too much. How can you treat the crown princess like this? Crown princess, please don't take offense. He drank 3 to 4 jugs of wine today, so he is a bit muddle-headed. That's right, crown princess, please don't take it to heart. Third senior brother hasn't reunited with his fellow disciples for a long time, so he was happy and drank a few more cups. I will apologize to you here, please don't take it to heart. The fourth senior sister also spoke. Third senior brother, so you have a time when you are so rude to others. You scared me. The fifth junior sister seemed to be angry. She took the opportunity to support Ji Yunhuang's arm. Under the moonlight, Tian Xueqing's eyes were like a black pool, which made her face look even paler. These people seemed to be apologizing to her, but they were obviously excluding her. It was obvious that they were in the same circle, while she was outside of it. Tian Xueqing paused and stepped forward again. Her tone was calm and firm. Your Highness, you must return with me. Ji Yunhuang suddenly turned his head to look at the fourth junior sister on his left. Xiaoye, you said that you have hangover soup in your room. Fourth junior sister Xiaoye glanced at Tian Xueqing and said, This. Yes. Good. This prince will go with you. It's been a long time since I drank your hangover soup. I wonder if the taste is still as special as before. Ji Yunhuang didn't even look at Tian Xueqing and pretended to make his decision. All right. Xiaoye agreed readily and smiled apologetically at Tian Xueqing. Crown Prince Consort, third senior martial brother, is very picky when it comes to food. Originally, they all liked to drink the hangover soup made by their younger sister. This time, please let him go temporarily and let him come with me. When he sobers up, how about this little sister personally send him back to your room? Sure, I'll go too. I'll go too. Fifth junior sister immediately signed up. All right, let's go together. The other 2 youths looked at each other and said. One of the youths glanced at Tian Xueqing and felt a little apologetic. Crown Prince Consort, why don't you come with us? Tian Xueqing took a step back and lowered her eyes. No need. She turned around and walked away alone. Under the moonlight, her back was straight, which made her figure seem even more desolate. She walked very quickly and disappeared at the end of the small path in just a moment. Third brother, your crown prince consort seems to be quite skilled. One of the youths couldn't help but say when he saw Tian Xueqing's figure disappear. Chapter 897. Ji Yunhuang didn't say anything, but his eyes flickered and his handsome face turned gloomy. It was obvious that he didn't want anyone to mention this crown princess. Was a considerate person and immediately said, all right, let's go to my place. Humph, with 4 drunken cats gone, I'm going to make a big pot of soup. The group of people chatted and laughed as they left. Ning Xuema sat on the tree branch and lazily rested her chin on her hand as she pondered. The way Ji Yunhuang and Tian Xueqing interacted with each other was very abnormal. What exactly happened between them? How did it end up like this? Furthermore, Ji Yunhuang's 2 junior sisters obviously harbored some special feelings for Ji Yunhuang. Moreover, both of them seemed to be quite scheming. Especially that her words were like a needle hidden in cotton. If he were to bring her back to the palace, she would definitely be an expert in the palace's infighting. No wonder people said that Ji Yunhuang's admirers were all over the world. It seemed that it was true. Fortunately, he was going to ascend the throne in the future and could have 3 palaces and 6 courtyards and 72 concubines. These women's wishes might not be disappointed. However, this Tian Shuaching's temperament was cold and she looked a little naive. With her temperament, would she be able to keep her position as the empress in the harem? Furthermore, Ji Yunhuang hated her so much. This girl's fate was really worrying. Sigh. She sighed softly. Why are you sighing out of nowhere? A voice suddenly sounded from behind her. Ah! Ning Xuema was startled. She was leaning on a small tree branch and this shock caused her body to sway and she almost fell down. An arm wrapped around her waist in time. Be careful. Ning Xuema abruptly turned her head. Her nose almost bumped into the other party's nose. She hurriedly tilted her head back and looked at the ancestor who had appeared behind her at an unknown time. You. When did you arrive? Not long ago. The ancestor's reply was always concise. Ning Xuema looked at the ancestor's arm that was wrapped around her waist and thought about the plate of pastries that had gone into his stomach. She felt that anger coming out again and her charming face turned cold. She struggled in his arms. Let go of me. Shinjiuli readily agreed, okay. Sure enough, he immediately let go of his arm. Ning Xuema was caught off guard. She struggled a little harder and fell down with a whoosh. Fortunately, her kung fu was quite good now. She somersaulted in the air and landed lightly on the ground. As soon as she landed, she immediately turned and left. She walked for a full 3 to 4 miles before she stopped and looked back. The road was vast and boundless, and no one was chasing after her. For some reason, a sense of disappointment rose in his heart. She pursed her lips and sat down on a stone bench by the roadside. A strange feeling of grievance rose in her heart. Strange, is it time for my period? Something's wrong with my mood. Why was he so easily angered? She rubbed the space between her eyebrows and hugged her knees as she stared at the stars. The sky was filled with stars. Looking at the stars in the sky in this world didn't seem to be any different from her original world. The Milky Way, the Big Dipper. Hanging in the sky, she was reminded of her own world. Other people had transmigrated because of some accident, but she had transmigrated after a nap. It was really strange. She didn't know what had happened to her own body. Had she become a sleeping beauty or a vegetable? Or had she died and entered the crematorium? Chapter 898. Ning Xuema's diehard friends and subordinates must be astonished and shocked and they saw her body, right? If she was in a vegetative state, maybe someone would tell her bedside stories to stimulate her brain and wait for her to wake up. She had transmigrated in her sleep. She didn't know if she would also transmigrate in her sleep one day. Maybe when she woke up in the other world, everything here would be a dream. But her dream was a bit too long. Since she couldn't remember her dreams, everything here would probably dissipate in her mind, and she wouldn't have any impression at all. What Dizun, what Sun-Moon sect, what Crown Prince. They were all just fleeting clouds. She was still the boss of her own secret service, leading a group of subordinates to go through fire and water. At this moment, her thoughts drifted thousands of miles away. Are the stars beautiful? Dizun's cold voice sounded beside her again. Yes, they are beautiful. Ning Xuema answered without thinking. She obviously hadn't pulled her thoughts back. She had always liked to look at the stars. Unfortunately, when she was in the modern world, the neon lights in the city blurred the stars, and the feeling of tranquility was missing. She would occasionally go to the mountains. At night when there was no one in the mountains, looking at the vast sky filled with stars would calm her impetuous heart. Dizun looked at her and saw that her eyes were still staring at the stars, as if she was in a trance. Obviously, she didn't realize who was sitting next to her. It was the first time Shinjoli had been ignored so thoroughly. His eyes flashed slightly. "What are you thinking about?" His voice had a strange hypnotic taste, like a hypnotist, making people want to tell him the truth. Ning Xuema was still in a mental state, so naturally, she wasn't on guard. She subconsciously opened her mouth. "I arrived here in a daze while I was sleeping. Perhaps everything that is happening right now is just a dream. When I wake up, I will return to my own world and forget everything that happened in this world." Dream? Forget? Shinjoli's eyes darkened. "Forget about me too. The most regretful thing in my life is that I can't remember my dreams at all. I can't remember any of my dreams. No matter how colorful or bloody my dreams are, as long as I wake up, I can't remember anything." Ning Xuema pursed her lips in distress. She had the strongest brain, super memory, and super analytical ability, but she couldn't remember any dreams. Could it be that God realized she was too smart, so he gave her a small flaw? Didn't he want her to be so perfect? Just as she finished speaking, she felt a sudden pain in her palm, as if she had been pricked by a needle. She shuddered and suddenly came back to her senses. Only then did she realize that it was the ancestor who had been sitting beside her and chatting with her for a while. Her eyelashes trembled as if she had seen a ghost. "You're scaring me again. Why are you stabbing me? It was so painful." Shinjoli looked down at her and said seriously, "I didn't appear and disappear mysteriously. I appeared by your side openly. You didn't realize it. As for stabbing you, well, did it hurt?" Ning Xuema glared at him fiercely. "Of course it hurt. If you don't believe me, let me stab you." Until now, her palm was still burning. Shinjoli's lips seemed to have a flash of a smile. He raised his hand and rubbed her head. "It's good that you know it hurts. It proves that this isn't a dream. It doesn't hurt to be pricked in a dream. I just want to prove to you that you're not dreaming." Chapter 899. Ning Xuema couldn't help but slap his hand away. She naturally knew that this wasn't a dream, she had transmigrated. Although the process of transmigrating was a bit thunderous, she looked at the ancestor's jade-like hand that was placed on her knee. Without thinking, she grabbed it and fiercely bit it. Shinjoli was stunned by her childish behavior. His eyes flickered, but he did not say anything and allowed her to bite him. Her small teeth bit down on his hand and the tip of her tongue touched his skin. In addition to the pain, there was also an indescribable itch that seemed to go straight to his heart. Ning Xuema loosened her bite and looked at the deep teeth marks on the back of his hand. Her bite was a bit heavy and almost made him bleed. "How is it? Does it hurt?" Ning Xuema finally got her revenge and looked at him with a proud expression. "It hurts a bit." Shinjoli looked at her bright eyes and honestly said, "It's good that you know it hurts. It proves that you aren't dreaming." Ning Xuema's eyes curved like crescent moons. She returned his words back to him. "I never thought that I was dreaming. Your proof doesn't make sense." Shinjoli looked at the teeth marks on his hand and then looked at her. Ning Xuema snorted, "Then I'll just treat it as me proving that I'm not dreaming. You also know that it hurts when I bite you. It proves that you're also real." Shinjoli, he looked at the 2 rows of teeth marks on his hand and then looked at her small mouth. "Your teeth are very beautiful." The 2 rows of teeth marks were very neat. Ning Xuema revealed her small white teeth and proudly said, "Of course, not only are my teeth beautiful, every part of my body is beautiful." She was very satisfied with her small body. Of course, this was with the exception of the fate of being a calamitous star. Shinjoli suddenly reached out and pulled her over. He let her sit on his knee and lowered his head to kiss her. "It really is beautiful. Let me take a closer look." It was a long and intimate kiss. Ning Xuema was gasping for breath. She wanted to push him away but couldn't. Xuema discovered that his kissing technique was becoming more and more proficient. The first time he kissed her, he was as stiff as a young chick. When his lips collided with hers, her teeth hurt a little. But now, he didn't have that awkward feeling anymore. Every kiss was deep. His body carried a kind of cool floral fragrance, which made her lose herself in an instant. His kiss this time was a bit special as he used his tongue to brush her teeth. Then he let go of Ning Xuema's lips. It's really good. His forehead was still against Xuema's forehead. Their breaths intertwined, and warmth spread between the two peoples as Ning Xuema's heart was beating like a drum. She looked at him who was so close to her. Great God, are you pursuing me? This kind of casual kissing was not how a master would treat his disciple. Shinjioli raised his eyebrows. You just realized it now. Ning Xuema pushed him slightly away. But I'm your disciple now, not your concubine. You can't just kiss me and go downstairs as you wish. Yes, is there a difference? Whether it's a concubine or a disciple, isn't it always you? Shinjioli's expression didn't change. Ning Xuema couldn't help but rub her eyebrows, but a master-disciple relationship is taboo. Since you want to pursue me, you shouldn't take me as your disciple. What was the Almighty thinking? Ning Xuema felt that she couldn't understand the Almighty's brain circuit. For me, any taboo is not taboo. Besides, isn't there a master-disciple relationship? Shinjioli replied disapprovingly. Chapter 900. Besides, you seem to be quite interested in the relationship between a master and his disciple. You made me up so well. Shinjioli rested his chin on her hair and answered lazily. Hey, when did I make you up? Ning Xuema was not convinced. She raised her head to look at him. But when she raised her head, her lips touched his beautifully curved chin, and he immediately lowered his head and kissed her lips. Then, he unceremoniously sold out Kirin. Little Apple said it. Ning Xuema was speechless. That big mouth. She had only said a few words. Kirin, who was recuperating in a large lake full of spiritual energy, suddenly sneezed and spurted out a column of water. It scratched its nose with its claws. What's going on? Who was speaking ill of it behind its back? Ning Xuema suddenly had an idea. Just because you heard Little Apple say that I made you up about the relationship between a master and his disciple, you just decided to make it true on me. You're very smart. Shinjioli praised her, implicitly admitting this point. Ning Xuema was speechless. This great god really took revenge for the smallest grievance. This revenge was unique. So, he was willing to accept her as his disciple for this, for the relationship between a master and his disciple. She couldn't help but push him and said with a straight face, your interests are really special. You made an exception to accept me as your disciple this time just to satisfy your interests. It's not entirely for fun. Your martial arts are too ordinary, so I want to train you personally. Who in this world can help you level up quickly than me, your master? Shinjioli told her his plan. My martial arts aren't bad anymore. Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows. I'm already at Earth Stage Level 2. Who could level up as fast as her? If this level was placed outside, she could do whatever she wanted. That's right, Earth Stage Level 2. You're the lowest level among all my disciples. Shinjioli attacked her self-esteem. Ning Xuema raised her chin. I'm a fast learner. I'll be able to level up very soon. Oh, I'll wait and see. Shinjioli hugged her even tighter. He had never been so eager for someone to level up so quickly. Ning Xuema was about to say something when she suddenly sensed something. She looked towards the small path not far away and saw 6 patrolling Sun Moon sect disciples hurriedly walking over. Ning Xuema's heart sank. She couldn't help but look back at Shinjiuli, who was hugging her. Your grand disciple is here. Do you want to flash? Shinjiuli raised his eyebrows and seemed a little surprised. Why do I have to dodge when they come? You're not wearing a mask. Ning Xuema couldn't help but remind him. More importantly, he was hugging her. If anyone saw the master and disciple hugging and chatting here, it would probably be explosive news after dawn. I don't want to wear a mask in front of you. The ancestor replied casually. But Ning Xuema started to push him away. She started to pull his hands that were wrapped around her slender waist. However, his hands were tightly clasped and she couldn't pull them away. Grand Marshal Uncle. Greetings, Grand Marshal Uncle. The group of disciples moved very quickly. In the blink of an eye, they were in front of Ning Xuema and Shinjiuli. They all bowed to greet her. Ning Xuema. She raised her head stiffly, expecting to see shock and other emotions on their faces. However, she didn't expect that they didn't have any shock. There was only a little surprise in their eyes. One of them couldn't help but ask, is Grand Marshal Uncle not feeling well? He saw Ning Xuema sitting there alone with her hands fidgeting around her waist. Chapter 901. Ning Xuema stared blankly for a moment before she suddenly came to a realization. The ancestor must have used a special invisibility technique. Only she could see him, and no one else could see him. No wonder these disciples only saluted her and turned a blind eye to their most respected ancestor. So that's why. Ning Xuema recalled her actions just now, twisting and turning as if catching lice. She felt a little embarrassed. Fortunately, she reacted quickly and coughed, I'm cultivating here. It's a special technique. She rudely used her buttocks to grind the ancestor's leg and pinched his thigh. Unfortunately, the flesh on his thigh was very tight, and she couldn't pinch it. Everyone knew that she was the ancestor's new disciple, and the ancestor's style of teaching was unique. Of course, they didn't have the opportunity to see it, but they had heard about it. Now that they saw Ning Xuema acting like this, they thought that she was really cultivating some kind of technique. Finally, they felt relieved and bowed to leave. The group of people quickly left. You're doing it on purpose. Ning Xuema fiercely sat on him again. Don't move. The ancestor's voice was slightly hoarse. The light in his eyes gradually deepened. Ning Xuema also finally felt the change in the body below her. Her face suddenly turned red. She obviously used a lot of strength. Even a stone would be crushed by her, but she didn't expect that the ancestor would act as if nothing had happened and even have a reaction. Guliulu. A special sound broke the ambiguous atmosphere between the two people. The ancestor's eyes drooped and fell on her stomach. Are you still hungry? Of course. She had only eaten a small piece of pastry for a day and a night. Ning Xuema remembered that unpleasant feeling again. She fiercely glared at him and said, Let me go, I'm going to eat. She was about to stand up. Shinjiuli directly wrapped his arms around her waist and said, Let's go, I'll take you to eat. Take me to eat. Eat what? Ning Xuema was about to ask, but the world in front of her was spinning, and the wind was whistling in her ears. She hurriedly opened her eyes and found that the two people were already in the clouds. The clouds on both sides were like a whirlwind, rapidly retreating several times faster than taking a plane. Ning Xuema's waist was held by him as they traveled through the clouds. That kind of feeling was indescribably wonderful. Was this the so-called riding on the clouds? Ning Xuema had seen this scene before. She also knew that the ancestor's psychokinesis, and that he should have become an immortal, and immortals could ride on the clouds. But after all, she had never seen it before. Now, she finally saw the real thing. He had even thoroughly experienced it. It's the ancestors was the ancestor was the ancestor was the ancestor was the ancestor was the ancestor. Great God, aren't you going to ride your sword? Ning Xuema subconsciously grabbed his sleeve, afraid that he would play a prank on her and throw her down. Flying swords. When you reach the 8th level of the Earth realm, you will be able to ride a sword. Shinjioli replied. In other words, with his ability, he didn't need to rely on any tools to fly. The Almighty was indeed the Almighty, a true immortal. Ning Xuema's eyes flashed with envy. She raised her chin and said, I can do it too. That's right. Even if you can't, I will train you until you can. Shinjioli stroked her hair. What was he saying? Why did it sound so cruel? Ning Xuema changed the topic. Where are you taking me? Good place. The Almighty's words were always so concise. Chapter 902. Ning Xuema decided not to ask further. She would talk about it when they arrived at the destination. She realized that while Shinjioli was flying with her, every once in a while, Shinjioli would make a gesture with his fingers. Then, whirlpools of various sizes would appear in front of them, and he would bring her directly into the whirlpool. After a moment of dizziness, when she opened her eyes again, it would be a completely different world from what she had seen before. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the celestial version of space jump? In those science fiction novels, when people wanted to drive spaceships to other planets, they didn't use conventional flight, but space jump. It was said that there were countless points between heaven and earth that connected different spacetime, which were the so-called space tunnels, or teleportation points. Modern people hadn't found where these teleportation points were, nor did they know how to activate them. However, some extraterrestrial life forms were extremely advanced in science and technology. They had found these teleportation points, which was why they could freely travel to and from Earth. Ning Xuema had always wondered how those celestial beings could ascend to the sky when they flew out of the atmosphere and into outer space. After all, the distance between this planet and that planet was tens of thousands of light years. Now, she suddenly understood that celestial beings didn't just rely on speed to ascend to the sky, but on discovering the space points and using them flexibly. Just like now, Di Zun had brought her through 3 or 4 whirlpools and finally appeared in the sky above a city. Below them was a bustling crowd. After Ning Xuema saw the faces of the people below, she couldn't help but sigh. Had she come to the kingdom of beauties? The people here were each more beautiful than the other. The men were handsome, and the women were beautiful. She couldn't even find one who was uglier. Even the people who sold fruits on the street could be compared to Panin. Where are we? Ning Xuema and Shinjioli walked on the street. The streets here seemed to be paved with green jade. It was smooth and comfortable to walk on. Looking at the buildings on both sides, they were completely different from the style she had seen before. However, they were extremely beautiful. Every house was so pleasing to the eye. The ageless kingdom. Shinjioli spat out 3 words. Don't they grow old? Ning Xuema looked around. Indeed, she didn't see any old people or even children. Yes, they won't age, won't die, won't give birth, and won't raise. Shinjioli pointed out the attributes of the people here. Ning Xuema's eyes brightened. The people here don't need to cultivate and can live forever. I'm so happy. Shinjioli raised his hand and rubbed her head. Don't think about shortcuts. Things that are too easy to get often have fatal flaws. Are you saying that I won't give birth or raise them? That's just one of them. What else? There are many more. All right, we didn't come here to study them. What do you like to eat? The things here are very good. Shinjioli kept his arm around her waist. Not only was the food good, everything here was good. Every item was meticulously crafted, exquisite to the extreme. Even the creases on the bun were like flower buds, exquisite and delicate, whetting one's appetite at a glance. You want to eat that? I'll buy it for you. Shinjioli noticed her gaze and immediately said. Ning Xuema raised her chin. I'll buy it myself. She was now a rich woman, with countless gold and silver on her. It was obviously unrealistic to use banknotes here. Fortunately, she still had some money on her. It was enough for her to eat heartily here. Chapter 903. Ning Xuema pulled away Shinjioli's hand and ran over alone. She ordered 2 small steamed buns and asked the waiter who was carefully kneading the buns, "How much is it?" The waiter didn't raise his head and only showed her 2 fingers. 2 large coins. Ning Xuema thought for a moment, then took out a small ingot of silver and placed it on the table that was similarly carved with exquisite carvings. She straightforwardly said, "This is 2 taels of silver. Keep the change." 2 taels of silver was equivalent to 2,000 copper coins. She had plenty of silver now. Seeing that the waiter had spent so much effort carving, she decided to give him more. The handsome waiter finally raised his head and looked at the silver on the table. He then looked at Ning Xuema, who was about to eat the steamed buns. He looked at her as if he was looking at a monster. "What is this? Why are you trying to fool me with a small tile?" "Tile? This is shining silver, okay? Are the tiles in your house made of silver?" Ning Xuema raised her head and looked at the roofs of the buildings. They were indeed shining with a silver light, as if they were made of silver. There were also a few buildings that were shining with a golden light. It was obvious that they were made of gold. The people here were really rich. The ground was paved with green jade, and the tiles were made of silver and gold. Ning Xuema looked at the walls again. They were also made of transparent and smooth green jade. It seemed that gold, silver, pearls, and jade couldn't be used as currency here. Then what did they use? Her 2 taels of silver really looked like a small tile here. Ning Xuema was embarrassed. A hand as delicate as white jade reached over and placed on the table 2 round and shiny beads. The little boss smiled and nodded. "Thank you." He then lowered his head and folded the bun again. Ning Xuema raised her head. It was the Almighty who had helped her out of her predicament. "Let's go." Shinjioli held her hand and left the steamed bun stall. "What kind of beads are the currency here? What kind of material are they made of?" Ning Xuema asked while eating a steamed bun. "That's a crystal bead, a kind of jade bead that contains a small amount of spiritual energy," Shinjioli explained to her. He stretched out his fingers, revealing a handful of crystal beads shining with a warm luster in his palm. Ning Xuema finished the steamed buns in a few bites. She picked up a crystal bead and looked at it. She could faintly sense a faint spiritual aura on it, but she couldn't tell what kind of jade it was. This was another world. She could not use the thinking of her own world to consider the things here. Ning Xuema stopped talking and began to pay attention to the things that the people around her used to trade. Sure enough, there were pearls of various sizes and colors. She didn't have any of these beads. In other words, she had become a pauper again. Luckily, she had the Almighty by her side. The Almighty was rich and didn't even bat an eyelid when buying things for her. Of course, the things he bought for her were mainly food. Along the way, the 2 of them bought a variety of specialty snacks. The flavors of the food here might not be all Ning Xuema's favorite, but it was true that everything was extremely exquisite. It seemed that the people here were especially obsessed with perfection. Even a stick of sugar-coated haws had a unique shape. There were even flowers carved on it. After walking around, Ning Xuema ate this and that. Unknowingly, she ate until she was full. However, she hadn't even eaten a third of the specialty snacks here. The people here really aren't ordinary. They're clever with their hands and are extremely patient. Even a meatball can be made to look like a crystal ball. At this moment, Ning Xuema was sitting on a bench by the roadside to digest her food. She could not help but sigh. Chapter 904. They're too bored, Shinjuli replied. Ning Xuema was stunned. She thought about their immortal lives and how they had no concept of life and death, so they developed all kinds of interests to do the most meticulous work to kill time. That's possible. Since they don't lack anything, why do they need those crystal beads? Although they don't age and die, it's only when there's no external force and their living conditions are met. Their bodies have a kind of defect that needs to be compensated with crystal beads. They need to eat a few crystal beads a day to maintain their body's needs. Only then can they live for a long time. You're saying that they need to absorb the spiritual power of the crystal beads to live. I see that the spiritual power between heaven and earth is very abundant here. Why don't they directly cultivate and absorb it? Ning Xuema was a very observant person. She could feel the abundant spiritual power here. Their physiques are not suitable for any kind of cultivation. It seemed that they weren't very happy. They also had their shortcomings. Ning Xuema suddenly didn't envy them. So what if they had a long life? What was the point of living like a pool of stagnant water? It was even more boring. She naturally liked to take risks. Although she was always rolling on the line between life and death after transmigrating, her life was very colorful. She never felt that life was difficult. Where did they get these crystal beads? Ning Xuema picked up a crystal bead to study. In the mountains 100 miles away from the city, there's a kind of mineral deposit. There are strange beasts in the mountains. It's not easy to collect them, Shinjuli explained. He pulled her up. Let's go. I'll show you something else. At this moment, Ning Xuema's little bit of resentment towards Shinjuli for losing the chess game had already disappeared. She followed beside Shinjuli, her eyes shining. What is it? There were many strange things in this country. Shinjuli also bought her a lot. There were cloaks, clothes, jade bracelets. There were simply too many. Fortunately, he gave her a storage bag. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to store so many things. Because the people here were extremely beautiful, Shinjuli and Ning Xuema were not too conspicuous walking on the street. Shinjuli cast a little spell to cover their specific appearances. Then, he took her to wander around so that they would not attract too much attention. However, Shinjuli was born with a special temperament. That kind of natural elegance and nobility was not something that people here could have. In addition, he was extremely generous. As long as Ning Xuema liked something, no matter how many crystal beads it cost, he would buy it without blinking his eyes. Ning Xuema finally experienced the feeling of having a sugar daddy. She also realized that most of the people here were relatively poor, because when these people bought things, most of them bought 1 or 2 crystal beads. Once the number of crystals exceeded 10, he would consider it again and again. Moreover, there were also luxury goods here, and the prices were not cheap. Ning Xuema saw a couple with her own eyes. The woman took a fancy to a crystal bracelet and asked for 12 crystal beads. The man immediately pulled the woman away, causing the woman to be very unhappy. She kept looking at the bracelet reluctantly. Ning Xuema could not help but look at the floating gauze hanging on her arm that was lighter than the sunlight. It seemed that this bracelet only cost 1,000 crystal beads, not to mention the other things that he bought for her. There were even more than 10,000 crystal beads in it. Shinjuli spent money like water, which naturally attracted some people's attention. Chapter 905. People began to follow them from behind. People began to whisper and point at them. Shinjioli did not care about these gazes. He pulled Ning Shuama and walked around freely. Great God, where did you get so many crystal beads? Ning Shuama wanted to go into his storage space to take a look. She wanted to see how many world currencies there were inside. I earned them. Shinjioli replied. It was good to have skills. No matter where you went, you could become a person above others. For example, the great god. Although he was not as famous in the immortal country as he was in the original continent, he still lived a very comfortable and relaxed life. He had a lot of treasures and was not afraid of thieves. She turned her head and glanced back. Then she smiled. Great God, you're too high profile. There are 3 thieves following behind you. Shinjioli was too lazy to turn around. If they don't find it tiring, then let them follow. You already noticed. Nonsense. With his high cultivation, how could he not notice that someone was following them? Ning Shuama naturally did not care about the thieves. She and Shinjioli walked while chatting casually. There was suddenly a gust of wind behind them. A person charged in between Ning Shuama and Shinjioli. Shinjioli casually pulled Ning Shuama into his arms. Then, he turned his body sideways, causing the man to miss and fly away. He was lying on the ground. This fall was not light. He struggled on the ground and could not get up for a while. He turned his head to look at Ning Shuama and Shinjioli with tears in his eyes. It was a very beautiful youth. He had big eyes and double eyelids. He was more delicate than a little girl. The handsome young man's teary eyes made people feel pity for him at first glance. Does it hurt? Ning Shuama wanted to do a good deed. She helped him up and patted the dirt off his body. Be careful when you walk. Thank you, big sister. That young man looked very young, even younger than Ning Shuama, so it was not difficult for him to call her sister. Ning Shuama patted his shoulder again. You're welcome. Go ahead. From now on, you have to walk the right path. Her words had a double meaning. The young man vaguely thanked her and turned to run away. Ning Shuama clapped her hands, as if she had just done a good deed, which made her feel refreshed. When she turned around, she saw Shinjioli looking at her with his arms crossed and a faint smile on his face. Ning Shuama shrugged. Guru, why are you looking at me like that? Shinjioli slowly walked over and cast a cleansing spell on her. Ning Shuama shuddered. She felt as if she had been washed from head to toe. I remember someone saying that men and women shouldn't touch each other. Shinjioli's tone was flat and no one could guess his emotions. Then what were you doing just now? The person she helped up was a handsome young man. Ning Shuama was startled. She didn't expect him to be waiting for her here. She tilted her head and looked at him. The ancestor's handsome face was as calm as always, and he didn't reveal his emotions. Was the guru jealous? Ning Shuama suddenly felt a little funny. She simply hugged her arms and said with a smile, Guru, I'm doing a good deed. I'm learning from Lei Feng. When I do good deeds, I don't care if the other party is male or female, ugly or handsome. Good deeds. Shinjioli walked forward and slowly pried open her clenched left hand. There were more than 10 crystal beads rolling in her snow-white palm. You call stealing other people's things good deeds? Ning Shuama coughed. She didn't expect her small movements to be seen by the guru. Chapter 906. Ning Shuama said confidently, he pretended to bump into me and stole mine first. So she took advantage of the situation and stole it back. She was the ancestor of the emptiness magic hands. That person took advantage of the situation and took 3 of her crystal beads. She took more than 10 of them back. Well, what do you mean by a good person? Shinjioli cast the cleansing spell on her again without batting an eyelid. He had no choice. He had a serious obsession with cleanliness, and he wanted to hold her. This time, he did it more gently, and Ning Xuema didn't notice it for a moment. She still said confidently, "This person didn't learn to be a good thief at such a young age. I stole his crystal beads to teach him a lesson. Maybe he will go on the right path in the future." She raised her head and saw a jade shop not too far away. Ning Xuema suddenly had a bright idea and pulled him into the shop. The jade shop was not big, and the decoration was not luxurious. Usually, Shinjioli would never go to such a shop, but Ning Xuema pulled him in. "Let's go in." It was rare for her to take the initiative to hold his hand. In this country, green jade was a common stone, and white jade was a more precious kind of jade. Sapphires were also rare. Ning Xuema looked for a long time and chose a deep sapphire pin. She asked for 15 crystal beads. Shinjioli was about to take out the money, but Ning Xuema pulled his sleeve and signaled him not to move. Then she and the shop owner bargained. Under her persuasion, the shop owner, who never gave in, finally agreed to give her 3 crystal beads. In the end, the deal was made with 12 crystal beads. Shinjioli was an expert. He looked at the sapphire and said sincerely, "There are some impurities in it, and the workmanship is a bit rough. If you like this, I can take you." He didn't finish his words. This was because Ning Xuema had pinned the sapphire on his lapel. When she lowered her head and busied herself in front of him, a faint fragrance wafted into his nose, causing him to be dazed for a moment. He vaguely felt as if he had experienced this scene before. Ning Xuema took a step back and sized him up. His white robe was without any impurities. Now that he had this sapphire pinned on his collar, it had a different kind of eye-catching effect. It also made him look more human. Shinjioli looked down at the sapphire and suddenly realized that the sapphire was unprecedentedly beautiful. "So you bought it for me." Ning Xuema handed her crystal beads to the boss and pulled him out. "I'm poor now, so I can't afford to buy you a good one. I'll buy you a high-end one in the future." She was considered a pauper in this mystical country, and these crystal beads were all she had. It was her money. Shinjioli touched the sapphire with his fingers. It felt cool. Ning Xuema knew that he had always pursued perfection. He didn't even accept disciples or grand disciples with average looks. This showed how picky he was. This sapphire pinned on her lapel probably wouldn't be good enough for him. Thinking about it, he casually gave her a cloak that cost more than 1,000 crystal beads. Her crystal beads were indeed not worth it. He probably didn't want to wear it, right? Ning Xuema sighed. "Forget it, if you don't like it." She was about to say that if he didn't like it, he could just take it off. Unexpectedly, Shinjioli pinned the sapphire on his lapel and adjusted it. He even covered it with a faint layer of psychokinesis, making it impossible for her to take it off. "No, I like it." Chapter 907. Although Shinjioli's voice was still faint, there was a kind of gentleness in it. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. She had bought this for him on a whim. She wanted to give him something that she had bought with her own money. Later, she realized that it was a little inappropriate. She probably stepped on the bottom line of the D-Zoon's items. Seeing him like this, her heart was slightly warm. She was still holding Shinjioli's hand. His hand was slightly cold, but Ning Xuema felt as if there was a warm current passing through his fingers and directly into her heart. It was originally an ordinary sapphire, but because it was worn on the great god's lapel, and because he had used his psychokinesis to protect it, it shone with a blue light. In an instant, it was upgraded by several grades. When the two of them came out of the store, the two thieves who had been following them finally couldn't help but make a move. First, they were noisy behind them, and then they started to fight. The one who was beaten up couldn't seem to stop and rushed towards the D-Zune. He took the opportunity to pull the sapphire on the D-Zune's lapel, but before his hand could touch the D-Zune's lapel, his whole body suddenly flew out horizontally. With a bang, he fell on the green jade floor and was disoriented. He didn't even know how he flew out. He wanted to get up, but his hands and feet were soft like noodles. He couldn't move at all. He looked up in horror and stared at Shinjoli. "You," Shinjoli said indifferently, "you won't be able to steal again. Once you break this rule, your hands and feet will be broken, and you will never be able to recover." He pulled Ning Xiaoma's hand again and ignored the two thieves. "Let's go." He held Ning Xiaoma's hand and left hand in hand. The thief's companion originally wanted to rush over and argue, but seeing this, he decisively stopped. After Shinjoli and Yifutian left, he walked over to help his friend up. Strangely, after Shinjoli left, the thief's hands and feet could move again. He moved around on the spot, and after confirming that his hands and feet were fine and there was no discomfort, he was overjoyed. He immediately pulled his companion away. Let's go somewhere else and steal again." His companion was still worried. "But that person just now said that if you steal again, your limbs will be broken. How could there be such a thing? He was just bluffing. Do you think I'm a pushover?" The man didn't care at all and dragged his companion away. 2 hours later, he was lying in an alley, screaming miserably. His limbs had completely turned soft and slender, and he could no longer move. Of course, Ning Xiaoma did not see these subsequent developments. At this moment, she was standing in front of a weapon shop, holding a pair of amei piercers, unwilling to let go. He didn't know what material the pair of amei piercers were made of, but the whole body was shining with a soft moonlight. The style of the handle was very ancient and elegant, and it felt very good to the touch. It was surprisingly suitable. The shop owner next to them was a cool young man. He was a man of few words. When Ning Xiaoma was fiddling with the pair of amei piercers, he just watched from the side. He only said one sentence to the ancestor, "I'll cast this blade on time. Your Excellency can pay the bill now." Ning Xiaoma's expression changed. These amei piercers were specially made for her by the great god. The blade looked as thin and brittle as colored glass. It was indeed exquisite, but could it be just an ornament that was only good for looking at but useless? Ning Xiaoma carefully flicked the blade. She didn't dare to use too much strength, for fear that her finger would break it. Her careful appearance probably stimulated the cool swordsmith. He suddenly stretched out his hand to Ning Xiaoma. "Give it to me." Chapter 908. What did he want to do? Ning Xiaoma casually handed one of them to the blacksmith. The blacksmith took it and without even looking at it, he stabbed it into a large piece of green jade on the side. The amei piercer went in as easily as piercing tofu. It didn't even make a sound. Ning Xiaoma's heart skipped a beat. She deliberately went forward to touch the green jade. The green jade was extremely hard and had the highest hardness. She then pulled out the amei piercer and easily pulled it out. It didn't take much effort at all. It really was a treasured blade. If it could pierce green jade so easily, it could definitely cut through gold and iron. She pulled out a strand of hair and blew it at the blade. Before the hair touched the blade, it was cut in half. The blacksmith proudly said, "It's made of 1,000-year-old moonlight iron. It can cut through any weapon. It can pierce through any cultivation body." It was this powerful. Not only was it a divine weapon, it was also a magical tool. Although Ning Xuema didn't know what this moonlight iron was, from the sharpness of this treasure and the blacksmith's serious attitude, she knew that this metal was definitely not ordinary. Moonlight iron is like moonlight. It comes from Moonlight Mountain. A piece the size of a fingernail is already priceless. The moonlight iron used to make this weapon weighs several kilograms. There is only one piece in the world. Its value is immeasurable. The blacksmith saw that Ning Xuema didn't seem to know the origin of the moonlight iron and couldn't help but explain. His voice was still cool. In Bulow City, only this one dares to take this job. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Great God, did you personally get this moonlight iron? Shinjioli lightly said, I just happened to pass by and get it. It's useless to just leave it there. Your martial arts are so bad, it's not bad to use it to protect yourself. He said it so casually, as if it was just a piece of scrap metal. The blacksmith looked at him with a constipated expression. Just leave it there. This kind of high-quality moonlight iron was hard to find even in the entire Bulow country. He had lived for tens of thousands of years and had never seen a second piece. When he saw it, he was stunned. He rubbed his eyes several times and carefully looked at it 3 or 4 times before confirming that it was real. He almost didn't dare to take this job. Because this item was too precious, even more precious than the Emperor's Imperial Jade Seal. Once someone saw it, it would cause a huge commotion in Bulow City. Countless people would covet it and fight over it. Even the monarch of Bulow City would miss it. That was why he didn't dare to let anyone know about it after he took on the job. A special workshop was specially built for it. There were no windows, only a small sealed door that could only allow one person to enter. The interior was decorated with extremely strong soundproofing materials. He dared not work during the day, and took other jobs as usual. In the dead of the night, when there was no one around to disturb him, he would enter the secret workshop and forge a piece that was 1,000 times more meticulous than embroidery. After expending a great deal of effort, he finally succeeded. This was the work he was most satisfied with so far. It was the crystallization of his blood, sweat, and tears. Just looking at him gave him a sense of pride. Ning Xuema didn't know about the swordsmith's hard work. She was holding it in her hands and admiring it. With a slight wave of his hand, it was as if he had waved a circle of moonlight, shining brilliantly. She looked at the workmanship again. The proportions were perfect, and it was neither light nor heavy. It was perfect, from the big parts to the small carvings on it. The workmanship was ridiculously fine. She was moved. Boss, how long did you take to forge this weapon? It seemed that this kind of workmanship wasn't done in a day. Chapter 909. Ning Xuema felt that it would take at least 3 to 5 years to complete the email piercer. The blacksmith said proudly, 30 years, 30 years. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. She had only known the Almighty for a few months. It seemed like this one-of-a-kind divine weapon was not specially made for her. It was obvious that this weapon was specially made for girls. Then who was he custom-made for 30 years ago? Yi Qingwan? Or Yunqi? Or some other female friend of the Almighty that she did not know yet? Or his future wife? She suddenly realized that she knew almost nothing about the Almighty. She slowly put down the email piercer. Why? You don't like it? Shinjioli raised his eyebrows. He thought that when Xuemo received this gift, she would be so happy that she would jump up and down. He didn't expect that she would have this kind of indifferent expression on her face. Ning Xuema smiled and said straightforwardly, the Almighty prepared this for someone else, right? I don't want to steal someone else's beauty. She suddenly had an idea. If this had been prepared for Yunqi, it would have been hard to say. If it had been prepared for Yi Qingwan, then she should steal someone else's beauty. That damn person would die of anger. She did not want to have such a high style. Almighty, who did you prepare this treasure for? She prayed that the Almighty did not give it to Yi Qingwan. Otherwise, she would not hesitate to snatch it away. Shinjioli glanced at her and put the weapon in his storage space. He said indifferently, since you don't want it, you don't need to know who I prepared it for. Ning Xuema was speechless. She had lost a treasure because of her pride. TSK, he did not want to give it to her in the first place. He only wanted to let her try it out. He was like a domineering CEO in modern times who brought his secretary to buy a gift for her. Of course, the gift was for someone else. The more she thought about it, the more she could not take it lying down. She asked the shop owner, "Where is Moonlight Mountain?" She wanted to get a piece of this metal and forge it. Shinjioli's eyes flickered. He guessed what she meant, but he did not say anything. The blacksmith looked her up and down and shook his head. Difficult. 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 Ning Xuema. What do you mean? You can't go up the Moonlight Mountain unless you're a Heaven Stage Psychokinesis Master. Mrs. Psychokinesis should be around Earth Stage Level 2. The difference is too great. Not to mention looking for the Moonlight Iron, even if you find that mountain, you won't be able to go up. Who would have thought that this swordsmith would have such sharp eyes? But there should be very few people with heaven-rank psychokinesis, right? Perhaps there were many in the Bulow country. After all, the people here were immortal and had endless time to cultivate. There should be a large number of people who have reached this level, right? Do you really want to go to Yueguang Mountain? Shinjioli looked at her with a faint smile. I can send you up there. The swordsmith's expression changed. He looked at Shinjioli and frowned. So what if we can go up? The guardian beast of Moonlight Mountain will also eat her. Shinjioli crossed his arms and looked at Ning Xuema. There is indeed a guardian beast on Moonlight Mountain, the Moonlight Pterosaur, an Earth Stage Level 8 beast. It is good at fire attacks, can hide, and is as fast as lightning. It is also known as the Electric Beast. He quickly explained the characteristics of this beast. Are you sure you want to go? Was he trying to provoke her? Ning Xuema quickly analyzed the characteristics of this beast in her mind. She smiled and said straightforwardly, yes. As long as you can send me up there. Chapter 9-10. The swordsmith was shocked. Was this little girl looking for death? Who wants to go to Moonlight Mountain? A clear female voice suddenly came from outside the door. If you can find 10 tails of Moonlight Iron, this king will give you 10 million crystals. Everyone turned around when they heard this. The door curtain was lifted and two beautiful maids came in first. They bent down and opened the door curtain. There was a young girl dressed in luxurious clothes. She was beautiful and unparalleled. Her aura was not small. When the swordsmith saw this woman, his expression changed slightly. He bowed down, Your Majesty. That woman was the king of the Immortal Kingdom. She nodded slightly and ignored the swordsmith. Her eyes swept over Ning Xuema and finally landed on Shinjioli. A trace of surprise flashed through her eyes. Shinjioli used a technique to hide his appearance and aura. The people here could not see his true appearance. The queen believed that her eyes were sharp enough to see a person's cultivation level, but she could not see his. She faintly felt that this man's cultivation level was deep and profound. It was like a vast ocean that no one could see through. Your Majesty is a heaven-ranked cultivator? The queen's eyes sparkled. Shinjioli was too lazy to answer her. He was too lazy to waste his breath on people he was not interested in. Ning Xuema also crossed her arms and watched from the side. She did not think that she would meet the queen while shopping, How dare you? Our queen is talking to you. How can you not answer? You. One of the maids sternly scolded. However, before she could finish her words, Shinjuli glanced at her indifferently. Just one glance was enough to freeze the maidservant. Her heart fiercely trembled and she could not say anything else. Shinjuli was too lazy to deal with people. He pulled Ning Xiaoma's hand. Let's go. This was probably the first time that the queen had been ignored so thoroughly. Her pretty face blushed slightly, and her eyes flashed with a hint of sternness, but she immediately hid it. She flashed in front of Shinjuli and Yang Kai. If the two of you can obtain more than 10 taels of moonlight iron, this queen will give you 20 million crystal stones. Shinjuli remained unmoved. He lowered his eyes slightly and waved his sleeve. The queen could not help but stagger a few steps to the side. Shinjuli held Ning Xiaoma's hand and walked out. Queen, the two maids' pretty faces were filled with shock. The queen's kung fu was the strongest in the immortal kingdom, but she didn't expect the man in front of her to be able to force her to take a few steps back so easily. Who was this man? This skill was simply heaven-defying. The queen was clearly shocked as well, but her eyes were filled with joy. She took a few steps forward and said, "Please wait, this queen is in urgent need of moonlight iron. If the two of you can bring the iron this queen needs, I am willing to give you 30 million crystal stones." This number was simply a sky-high price. The blacksmith had spent 30 years to make the eme piercer for the ancestor, and the cost was only 100,000 crystal stones. The queen was willing to take out 30 million crystal stones. It was clear that she had invested a lot. It seemed like she was determined to obtain this moonlight iron. Ning Xiaoma's footsteps stopped. She simply said, 40 million. 40 million crystal stones, we will find it for you. 10 taels of moonlight iron was only half a caddy. In other words, a piece the size of a pigeon egg would be enough. It shouldn't be too hard. Should she find it? She was going to Moonlight Mountain to find iron anyways. Finding a piece for the queen to make a fortune wasn't a bad idea. She didn't want to be a pauper here. She wanted to use her own hands to grab her first bucket of gold. If she could obtain 40 million crystal stones, Ning Xiaoma would become a rich woman here. Chapter 9:11. The queen let out a sigh of relief. She had obviously gone crazy over the moonlight iron and agreed without any hesitation. However, she would only pay after she saw the goods. After a round of haggling, the queen finally agreed to pay 50,000 crystals as a down payment. The rest would be paid after she saw the goods. Both sides agreed on a month. Once Ning Xiaoma obtained the moonlight iron, she would inform the queen. The queen left with her two maids in satisfaction. The swordsmith secretly shook his head and spat out 4 words, "She's going crazy over a man." Ning Xiaoma turned around and knocked on his head. "What do you mean?" 40 million crystals, more than half of the national treasury. The queen really went crazy for that man. The swordsmith couldn't help but vent his dissatisfaction. The queen did it for a man. What kind of man was worth the queen doing this for? Ning Xiaoma and the swordsmith exchanged a few words. From the swordsmith, Ning Xiaoma learned a bit of gossip about the queen. It turned out that 20 years ago, a handsome man came to the immortal kingdom. This man was good at music. The queen fell in love with him at first sight and wanted him to be her husband. She wanted to use the power of the whole kingdom to please him. This man came to Immortal City to look for the moonlight iron. However, this was something that could only be found by chance. He searched the entire Immortal City but couldn't find it. Moreover, he was seriously injured and couldn't go to Moonlight Mountain. When the queen heard about this, she used all kinds of methods to find this thing for him. She had already reached the point where she didn't care about the cost. using the power of the whole kingdom to please one person. This queen had the shadow of King Yu of Zhou. King Yu of Zhou teased his vassals in order to win the beauty's smile. The queen also didn't care about the cost to please the handsome man. The people of the immortal kingdom were all good-looking. The queen was also outstanding. What kind of man could make her so infatuated with him? To be honest, Ning Xuemo was a bit curious. The swordsmith didn't want to talk too much about his king. After a few words, he didn't want to talk about it anymore. He only gave a few reminders out of kindness. He said that there was no one in the entire immortal kingdom who had reached the heaven realm. There were people who reached the 9th level of the earth realm who went to Moonlight Mountain and used a special method to climb up. However, they never came back down after they went up. That was why the price of Moonlight Iron was so exorbitant. Therefore, it was impossible for Ning Xuemo to find outside help. They could only rely on themselves. He said all this to let Ning Xuemo understand how difficult the task she had taken on was. Ning Xuemo had actually understood how rare Moonlight Iron was when the queen had raised the price with all her might, so she had only smiled at the swordsmith as reminder. He looked at Shinjiuli with bright eyes. "Guru, will you send me up?" Shinjiuli was speechless. This girl was so eager to agree to the queen's deal. How much money did she need? Did she know how hard it was to find Moonlight Iron? He said leisurely, "All right. However, I will not help you search for it. You'll have to rely on yourself when you get to the top." He wanted to bring her to Mount Yueguang to train, and this was a good opportunity. Within the majestic Bulow City Imperial Palace, the curtain made by shark men fluttered in the wind. A red-clothed man reclined on a white jade bed. His eyebrows were like cold smoke, and his eyes were like autumn waves. He was as elegant as a poem, and as handsome as a painting. Beside him was a blue guqin. The guqin was overflowing with colors. Among the 7 strings, one of them was a strange bright red color, as if it had drunk enough blood. It made sounds without any wind, and from time to time, it would emit strange cries. Chapter 9:12. The sound of the zither was vague and awe-inspiring. It was as if there were countless souls struggling inside. That red-clothed man used his fingers to gently play the zither. His brows were slightly furrowed and his eyes were deep. When the unaging queen came in and saw this scene, she waved her hand and the maid beside her silently withdrew. "Brother Shui, are you feeling better today?" The queen walked over and her voice was incredibly gentle. That man only cared about playing the zither and didn't pay attention to her. The queen's eyes flashed with hidden bitterness, but she immediately smiled and said, "Brother Shui, this king sees that your complexion is much better today. Many thanks." That red-clothed man finally spat out these 2 words. He slowly got up and with a wave of his sleeve, the blue zither disappeared into his sleeve. He seemed to be really tired of lying down and got off the bed. The queen immediately walked over. "Brother Shui, I'll help you wash up." That red-clothed man pulled the corner of his lips and waved her away with a wave of his sleeve. "No need." He lowered his eyes and looked at his wrinkled red clothes. He frowned slightly and pointed at himself. A faint red light flashed, and his red clothes regained their brilliance. Brother Shui's martial arts have also recovered. Is this a cleansing spell? It really is mysterious. The queen didn't miss the opportunity to praise him. That red-clothed man seemed to give a lazy smile. He was born very beautiful and his smile was like a flower blooming. The queen looked at him with infatuation. "Brother Shui." The red-clothed man walked to the table and sat down. He used his fingers to comb his long hair. His every movement was graceful and full of charm. The queen couldn't move her eyes away. Her eyes became even more infatuated. She couldn't help but walk over and pick up the jade comb beside her. "Brother Shui, I'll comb your hair for you. The red-robed man's eyes turned cold. No. Just as he was about to say, no need, the queen had already faintly interrupted him. Brother Shui, you're still not willing. There was a suppressed resentment and anger in her voice. She was the ruler of the unaging country after all. She still had the pride of a ruler in her bones. That red-clothed man finally looked at her and revealed a smile that wasn't a smile. If I'm not willing, what will you do? The queen was stunned by his smile and muttered, of course. Of course I won't do anything, that's a good boy. The man in red stood up and ruffled her hair. I like obedient girls. He paused for a moment and then asked casually, you still didn't find anything today? The queen's soul almost left her body when he touched her. She couldn't wait to grab his hand and kiss it. At the same time, she finally remembered the purpose of her visit. Oh right, the moonlight iron that you want might be available soon. The red-clothed man raised his head, his eyes bright. What do you mean? The queen then briefly recounted her encounter with Ning Xuema and the deal they had made. Finally, he said, I think they are reliable. Perhaps they can really succeed. After listening to her, the man in red said lazily, the ignorant are fearless. Recently, there have been too many people who have died for money. Brother Shui, I know you feel sorry for the innocent people who lost their lives when they went to get the iron, but you have to let someone try. What if it succeeds? Does he feel sorry for those innocent people who lost their lives? The red-robed man's lips twitched again. She finally understood, okay. He had never felt sorry for anyone's death. Chapter 9:13. An Earth Stage Level 2 dares to take on this kind of task. You're just throwing your life away. He said bluntly. A few days ago, there were also a few groups of people who agreed to do this job for the sake of money. However, they were all Earth Rank Level 8 and above. There were even 2 people who had reached Earth Rank Level 9, but they still left valiantly. Then, they were like meat buns thrown to dogs, never to return. Those people didn't succeed. How could an Earth Stage Level 2 girl succeed? What a joke. This time, the red-clothed man didn't have any hope. He lowered his eyes to test his psychokinesis, and his fingers tightened slightly. He had at most recovered 3/4 of his power, which was barely the power of an Earth Stage Level 9 expert. If he went up now, the risk would be huge, but his matter was urgent. Instead of waiting hopelessly, he might as well take the risk and fight. He didn't want to waste any more time here. He was about to say goodbye, but the queen's words made his heart skip a beat. That girl naturally can't do it. But her companion's cultivation is broad and profound. With that man's help, maybe this matter can succeed. What's the man's cultivation? The queen shook her head. I can't tell. That person seems to be hiding his strength. The red-clothed man raised his eyebrows. Although the people of the Immortal Kingdom couldn't cultivate high psychokinesis, they had a special ability that could see the level of a person's psychokinesis. The stronger the person, the clearer they could see. The queen was the leader among them. She could even see the level of a person's cultivation. She had never heard of a person that she couldn't see through, but now there was one. What does that man look like? The red-clothed man was finally a little interested. The queen paused and shook her head. I can't see clearly. That person didn't wear any mask, but she couldn't see his face. She only felt that he was very handsome and had an aura. The red-clothed man's expression changed slightly, and his fingers clenched in his sleeves. Could it be that person? That didn't seem right. That person didn't get close to women. There shouldn't be a girl by his side, unless that girl was Ning Xuema. No, Ning Xuema's psychokinesis was only at human stage level 5 or 6. It was impossible for her to reach Earth Stage Level 2 in such a short time. Then, was it them or not? You can't see that man clearly, but you should be able to see that woman clearly, right? What does she look like? The red-clothed man asked calmly. The queen was startled for a moment and immediately became jealous. Brother Shui, that girl is just an ordinary girl, Ah Yuan. The red-clothed man suddenly called out the queen's nickname. His voice was gentle. I just want to know their identities. I have no other intentions. Is that girl about 15 or 16 years old and has a hexagonal cinnabar mole between her eyebrows? The queen's soul melted when she heard him call her Ah Yuan. She couldn't help but nod. Yes, she does have a snow-white cinnabar mole between her eyebrows. Brother Shui, do you know her? The red-robed man's eyes drooped. How could he just know him? There seemed to be wind and clouds swirling in the depths of his dark eyes, but when he raised his head again, it was as calm as the wind. He seemed to be a little dispirited. Got it. He waved his hand again. I'm going into seclusion for a month. I don't want anyone to disturb me. It was obvious that he was chasing him away. Although the queen was somewhat unwilling, she still did not dare to offend him, so she said a few more words of concern before leaving. Chapter 9:14. When she was about to leave, the queen paused. Brother Shui, if those two people find the moonlight iron within 30 days, should I inform you immediately? The man in red said faintly, No need, I may not even be in seclusion for a month, the length is uncertain. In short, before I come out of seclusion, no one is to disturb me. His gaze fell on the queen's face, his gaze gentle. Ah Yuan, you can do it, right? The queen agreed and finally left reluctantly. Not only would she not disturb her lover's practice, she would also send a large number of troops to protect him, ensuring that nothing would go wrong during his seclusion. When she left, she even considerately closed the window for him. The queen's back disappeared outside the door. The man in red's eyes were cold with disgust. He lowered his head and thought for a moment, then his figure flashed and disappeared. Ning Xuema finally understood why only heaven rankers could go up the Moonlight Mountain. It was because it was a mountain suspended in the air. The mountain was thousands of feet high, piercing through the clouds. The top and bottom could not be seen. The bottom of the mountain was a black, ink-colored sea of clouds. The Moonlight Mountain was in the middle of the black sea of clouds. It was faintly shining like the moon, like a jade plate held out from the dark clouds. The scenery was surprisingly beautiful. Ning Xuema kicked down a millstone-sized rock beside her, wanting to hear the echo to measure the depth below. However, when the big rock came into contact with the black clouds, it melted and disappeared as if it came into contact with strong sulfuric acid. In other words, the black clouds could not be touched at all. The mountain that Ning Xuema was standing on was the closest to it, but it was still a few thousand meters away. If one did not know how to ride the clouds, one would not be able to reach it at all. However, it seemed that when one cultivated to Earth rank level 6, one could ride a sword and fly. Since it was said that only heaven rankers could do it, there would definitely be other situations ahead. It's not too late for you to regret it now. Shinjioli said. Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows. I never knew how to write the word regret. Then do you have a way to deal with the guardian beast above? Different situations call for different measures. Ning Xuema shook her head. She had yet to see what the mythological beast looked like, nor had she fought with it, so she was unable to formulate a specific battle strategy. Going with the flow and adapting to the situation was her strong suit. However, after hearing about the characteristics of the Moonlight Pterosaur, she had a rough plan in her mind, so she wasn't completely unprepared. What an impulsive girl. Shinjioli knocked on her head rudely. Ning Xuema snorted, I just don't want to take advantage of others. When she thought of the pair of eye piercings, she felt as if a thorn was stuck in her heart. You're ambitious. I like it. Shinjuli reached out and grabbed her. Since that's the case, I'll send you up. He pulled her up into the air and flew towards the Moonlight Mountain. Ning Xuema had just flown above the black sea of clouds when she felt as if there was a huge force sucking her in from below. Her body instantly became as heavy as iron. Shinjuli hugged her. She felt as if her lower body was about to be torn apart by the suction force. This black sea of clouds was simply like a black hole in the universe. It seemed that those who only knew how to ride a sword and fly wouldn't be able to pass through this place. They would be directly sucked down. She couldn't help but tug at the corner of Shinjuli's clothes, fearing that he wouldn't be able to hold her and throw her down. Fortunately, Shinjuli's martial arts had never disappointed anyone. When he carried her and flew up, his face was still calm and relaxed, as if it wasn't strenuous at all. Chapter 9:15. Are you scared? Shinjuli's lips curled into a smile as she clung onto his body tightly. Shinjuli was pleased. I'm not scared. Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows and looked at him. I know you won't throw me down. Shinjuli's heart skipped a beat. Did she finally trust him again? He tightened his arms around her and promised, yes, I won't leave you behind no matter what. It was a very ordinary promise, but it made Ning Xuema's heart warm. She finally asked the question that had been hovering in her heart, Great God, in the end, who do you want to give that pair of eye piercings to? Who in the world had such good fortune? Would you believe me if I said that I wanted to give it to you? Shinjuli looked at her with a deep gaze. I don't believe you. Ning Xuema replied straightforwardly. That swordsmith forged it for 30 years. I wasn't even born 30 years ago. Who was he trying to fool? Guru, are you trying to say that you have the ability to predict the future? You knew that you would meet me, so you prepared it in advance. I do have the ability to predict the future, but you are an exception. Shinjuli replied slowly. He had never been able to see through her fate. A fortune teller couldn't predict their own fate, so he couldn't see his own either. However, he was too lazy to do so. If fate was determined by the heavens, there was no point in knowing in advance. It was only interesting when everything was unknown. His fate had always been decided by himself, so it didn't matter if he could predict it or not. If you can't predict the future, then why did you prepare this for me 30 years in advance? Ning Xuema wanted to get to the bottom of it. I might not have told you, but a day in our world is a year here. Shinjuli replied slowly. Ning Xuema was speechless. Wouldn't 30 years here be 30 days in her world? What stage was she and the guru at 30 days ago? It seemed like, when the guru used Han Shanyue's identity to take her in as a concubine, so he had been preparing a weapon for her since then. Ning Xuema's heart warmed slightly. She was a little embarrassed. Why didn't you say so earlier? If she had known this earlier, she wouldn't have come here in a fit of anger. Do you regret coming here? Do you want me to bring you back? Shinjuli took in the look on her face. Ning Xuema shook her head. No. I want to go. There was no turning back. She had always been someone who would rather break than bend. She was now very curious about the Moonlight Mountain. She also wanted to find a piece of moonlight iron to forge a weapon for the Almighty as a return gift. Moreover, she had promised the Queen that she would also find a piece of moonlight iron for her. The Moonlight Pterosaur is best at fire attacks, while you are a wood attack. Wood breeds fire, so your attacks will only increase its fierceness, not restrain it. You don't know how to use water attacks, so you'd better use fire attacks to deal with it. I'm going to teach you a set of fire attack spells now. Whether you can understand it in time depends on you. Shinjuli began to explain the characteristics of the moonlight pterosaur and the methods to deal with it. At this time, Ning Xuemo listened very carefully. Her memory was very good, so she remembered almost everything Shinjuli said once. What Ning Xuemo didn't know was that when she and Shinjuli flew away from the mountain, a man in red appeared. His gaze fell on Ning Xuemo's back, and his eyes showed a complicated expression. Chapter 9:16. The man in red slowly clenched his fists in his sleeves and said in a low voice, "Momo. You are mine. We missed each other in our previous life, but we won't meet again in this life." Ning Xuemo felt that if there was a ranking of the most deceptive places, this Moonlight Mountain would definitely be at the top. She had never seen such a deceptive place before. There were stones all over the mountain, glowing stones, big and small, round, sharp, flat. There were more of them than the stars in the sky. Although the appearance of the stones were different, the color was the same. Every one of them glowed with moonlight, giving people the illusion that the entire valley was filled with luminous pearls. Shinjuli told her that the moonlight iron was among these stones. Only by picking them up would one be able to tell whether they were moonlight stones or moonlight iron. If one didn't pick them up, one wouldn't be able to tell. This wasn't the most deceptive thing. The most deceptive thing was that every time she picked up a stone, an Earth-ranked level 8 moonlight pterosaur would appear out of thin air. The disturbed moonlight pterosaur was like an enraged lion, attacking the culprit who disturbed their beautiful dreams. The ancestor was a man of his words. After sending her up, he kindly reminded her that she could only pick up one stone at a time, or else she would have to bear the consequences. Then, he leisurely sat at the side and arranged a chessboard on a rather flat rock. He played chess with himself for fun, leaving her to be chased by the moonlight pterosaur all over the mountain. The moonlight pterosaur was about the same size as the legendary pterosaur, but its whole body was the color of moonlight. When it flapped its wings, raging flames would cover the sky. Although this beast's body was sturdy and looked rather clumsy, its speed was unbelievably fast, just like lightning flashing. Ning Xuemo's expeditious steps was unparalleled in the world, but when she encountered this beast, her hands and feet were tied. She couldn't completely avoid the attacks of the moonlight pterosaur. When she couldn't avoid it, she could only meet force with force. Fortunately, she had a weapon on her. It was a long sword, which was given to her by Yelu Jing, and for self-defense when she received the identity of a new disciple of the Sun-Moon sect. Although it wasn't a rare divine weapon, it was still extremely sharp. In addition to the mental power she poured into it, it could cut through gold and jade like tofu. However, her sword did not even leave a white mark on the beast's body. Therefore, Ning Xuemo wanting to use her sword to cut off its head was clearly wishful thinking. After all, it was an Earth-ranked level 8 mythological beast. Its storm-like attacks forced Ning Xuemo into a fluster. There were a few times when she was almost burnt to ashes by the flames it spat out. She was almost chased and beaten up by this guy. She was tortured very badly. Fortunately, she was quick to adapt and had many new ideas in the fight. After suffering several losses, she finally used the incantation of fire that Shinjuli had just taught her. Logically speaking, this kind of spell could only be used when one's psychokinesis of fire reached the Earth rank. However, Ning Xuemo's psychokinesis of fire was only at the human rank level 5, so the first time she used it, it was only a ball of fire the size of a ping-pong ball. When the small fireball rushed in front of the moonlight pterosaur, it was extinguished by the pterosaur's mouth. Quack, quack, quack. The moonlight pterosaur laughed mockingly, its laughter sounding like 1,000 ducks quacking. Shut up. Di Zun, who was playing chess, was disturbed by it. With a shake of his hand, a ball of blazing white light flew over and entered the moonlight pterosaur's wide-open mouth like lightning. Chapter 9:17. The moonlight pterosaur jumped 3 feet high, and when it landed on the ground, its entire head was burnt. Naturally, it died. Ning Xuema was so tired that she was panting. She couldn't help but glance at him. Shinjioli played a chess piece by himself. "Don't worry, I'm not helping you. It's just that it's too noisy." Ning Xuema ignored him. She looked at the moonlight stone in her hand that she had just picked up. All the luster had dissipated. The shining moonlight stone had become an ordinary stone, unremarkable. The difference between moonlight stone and moonlight iron is that after the moonlight pterosaur released by the stone is killed, the moonlight iron's luster will not disappear. Instead, it will become brighter. Shinjioli seemed to have eyes on the back of his head. "How can I distinguish between moonlight stone and moonlight iron before moving the stones?" Ning Xuema didn't want to waste more energy. Before the moonlight pterosaur is killed, it's impossible to distinguish. Shinjioli played another chess piece. "So you have to be prepared to turn over all the stones in this mountain." Ning Xuema was speechless. She looked at the large and small stones in the mountain, and the corner of her mouth twitched. How long would she have to turn over all these stones? More importantly, how many moonlight pterosaurs would she have to fight with? "I forgot to tell you, these moonlight pterosaurs will be more powerful than the previous one. Moreover, if you can't turn over all of them today, these moonlight pterosaurs that you have killed will be reborn. The next day, all the stones will be reshuffled and changed positions, but not a single one will be missing. You have to start from the beginning." Shinjioli kindly reminded her again. Ning Xuema's mouth twitched even more. This was too perverted. How could she find the moonlight iron properly? What's the ratio of moonlight stone to moonlight iron? Ning Xuema only hoped that the ratio was higher. That way, it would be easier for her. "It's hard to say." Shinjioli told her the truth. "I once studied here for a month. I killed the moonlight pterosaur 30 times, and only found 4 pieces of moonlight iron. Didn't that mean that even if she searched through all the rocks in the valley, she might not be able to find a single piece?" Ning Xuema's pretty face turned green from the blow of the truth. No wonder this small piece of moonlight iron was so expensive. It was actually so hard to find. It was even more difficult than winning a lottery ticket. Don't be discouraged. Maybe you'll be so lucky that you'll find one every time you kill a dragon. Try your best. Shinjioli comforted her with a few words and went back to playing chess. Ning Xuema wished she could sweep his chessboard. If he had told her about his difficulties earlier, she might have backed out a long time ago, but now, she had already bragged. If she couldn't find the moonlight iron, she would be too ashamed to face her elders in Jiangdong. Ning Xuema pursed her small lips. In her heart, she summed up the lesson she had just learned. She steeled her heart and flipped open the second stone that looked quite pleasing to the eye. Then, a moonlight pterosaur jumped out. Because of the lesson she learned from fighting with the first moonlight pterodactyl, Ning Xuema wasn't so embarrassed this time. She was no longer chased by the moonlight pterodactyl. When she used the psychokinesis of fire again, the fireball she released began to grow bigger and bigger. It grew from the size of a ping-pong ball to the size of a steamed bun. Although it still couldn't cause any substantial damage to the moonlight pterodactyl, it could at least make it hesitate a little. In this way, she fought with the moonlight pterodactyl for a full 2 hours. The moonlight pterodactyl still couldn't defeat and tear apart this delicate-looking little girl. Chapter 9:18. The moonlight pterosaur was very unhappy and couldn't help but roar at the sky. But halfway through its roar, it was interrupted by a ball of white light flying towards it. The white light suppressed its roar back into its throat with an overwhelming attack. So, the second moonlight pterosaur couldn't get up again. Ning Xuema threw away the stone that had turned into an ordinary stone in her hand and looked at Shinjioli again. Those who disturb me will be killed. Shinjioli spat out such a cold sentence and continued to play chess. Ning Xuema let out a sigh of relief and sat down on a rock that looked quite safe. Although she was exhausted from fighting with such a strong opponent, her battle experience increased rapidly and the fire psychokinesis in her body was also flowing faster. She closed her eyes and adjusted her inner breath for a while. Then, she stood up again, moved her hands and feet, and opened the third moonlight stone. Just like that, she fought with the moonlight pterosaurs one by one. As her battle experience increased, the small fireball she released became bigger and bigger. When she fought with the fifth moonlight pterosaur, a circle of faint red light suddenly appeared around her body. Her fire psychokinesis that had been stagnant finally leveled up. This was simply like fighting monsters to level up. Ning Xuema looked at Shinjioli. He actually brought her here to level up, right? After all, people's potential would be completely stimulated in a fight. It was also the fastest to level up and the skills that were cultivated would be the most firmly remembered. In fact, the 5 moonlight pterosaurs were all killed by the Almighty's big moves in the end. It was all when she was about to lose or when she was most tired. The reasons he casually came up with were all kinds of strange. They were noisy, the wind from the fan blew on him, the fire from the breath made him hot. After killing the 5th moonlight pterosaur, Ning Xuema ran to Shinjioli and sat in front of him. Almighty, I'm hungry. She was sweating all over, her hair was a little messy, and her pretty face was even a little dirty. But her eyes were as bright as stars and her cheeks were rosy. Shinjioli's eyes flickered as he waved his hand. Come here. Ning Xuema had been taken advantage of by him several times, so she wasn't willing to be fooled again. She was afraid that he would pull her into his arms and kiss her until the sky turned dark again. Her tofu had already been taken advantage of by him countless times. If he continued to take advantage of her, she would become tofu dregs. She sat where she was and shook her head. No. Shinjioli pulled out a comb out of nowhere and twirled it around his fingertips. He looked at her and said, Aren't you thinking too much? I just don't want to see your messy hair. Ning Xuema couldn't help but touch her hair. Yes, it was indeed knotted. She looked at the Almighty again. His clothes were as white as snow, not a single bit out of place. There wasn't even a wrinkle on his clothes, not even a speck of dust. She had just been fighting with the moonlight pterosaur, and the dust had almost covered the sky. This guy could still be so perfect in the middle of the battlefield, which made her feel intoxicated. Ning Xuema didn't stand on ceremony with him. She walked over and squatted beside him. She turned around and faced him with the back of her head. Thank you. She felt at ease and let him comb her hair. Under normal circumstances, if a super insecure person was willing to show her back to you without hesitation, it proved that she trusted you. Shinjioli looked down at her defenseless appearance, and a touch of gentleness flashed through his eyes. He first used a cleaning spell on her body to make her look as clean as if she had just taken a shower. Then, he raised his hand to comb her hair. Chapter 9:19. The teeth of the comb touched Ning Xuema's scalp from time to time, and it had a massage effect, making her feel very comfortable. The comb went all the way to her hair, and it lasted for a long time. The comb went all the way to her tail, and it was harmonious and beautiful. Ning Xuema suddenly thought of a few folk songs, and then she was embarrassed. It seemed to be a wedding song, and it was a blessing for the couple to be united. The Almighty just couldn't stand her being dirty, so he was just combing her hair. Why did she suddenly think of that? Ning Xuema's hair was originally just casually tied up behind her back. It didn't look good, but it was neat and convenient for fighting. Now, Shinjioli had tied her hair into a slanted bun. She looked cute and charming at the same time. Shinjioli had brought a lot of things with him, so he casually took out a mirror and gave it to her. Take a look. Is it pleasing to the eye? Of course it was pleasing to the eye. Ning Xuemo looked at her exquisite hair and was very satisfied. She couldn't help but straighten her body and pounce on him. She gave him a loud kiss on the side of his face. Great, a kiss as a reward. Before Shinjioli could react, she had already quickly sat down opposite him. She looked at him with a pair of bright eyes. Almighty, can we eat now? She was starving. Shinjioli raised his hand and touched the place where she had kissed him. His handsome face was calm. Cut corners, so you'll be punished with a meal. Ning Xuemo was speechless. No, she was so hungry. She blinked her eyes and didn't say anything. She just looked at him pitifully. Shinjioli knocked on the chessboard and said bluntly, "There's no use acting cute. I'll give you 2 choices. 1, play a game with me. If you win, you can eat. 2nd." His voice paused, and he looked at her with a smile that wasn't a smile. Don't cut corners. Ning Xuemo looked at the chessboard and then looked at him. She decisively pounced on him and sincerely kissed him on the other cheek. Is this okay? Just as she was about to get up, he hugged her waist and pressed her into his arms. He gave her a real deep kiss. After a while, he let her get up and said slowly, "This is okay." He raised his hand and put away the chessboard. There was a bowl of porridge and a few steaming hot dishes on the stone. Eat. These dishes were all Ning Xuemo's favorite dishes. What was even more amazing was that these dishes had something that could quickly replenish her physical strength. After she finished eating, she felt that her fatigue had disappeared by more than half, and her strength had returned by quite a bit. Come here. Shinjioli waved at her again. He wouldn't ask her to kiss to the end to kiss him again, would he? Not only did they kiss before the meal, they even wanted to kiss after the meal. Ning Xuemo was in a good mood, so she decided to satisfy him this time. She happily pounced on him, hugged his neck, and kissed him on the cheek. Is it okay? She had just eaten and hadn't wiped her mouth yet. Her mouth was still a little oily. She treated it as wiping her mouth on his face, so she rubbed against him a few more times. Shinjioli was speechless. He pulled her away from him. Naughty. He pressed her down on the stone in front of him and kept massaging her shoulders and back. It turned out that he asked her to come over to give her a massage to unblock her muscles and bones. Ning Xuemo closed her eyes and enjoyed his massage. The Almighty's massage was different from the masseurs she had seen in her previous life, but it was very accurate. The places where he massaged seemed to be reconnected and all the soreness disappeared without a trace. Chapter 920. The great god's massage even made Ning Xuemo's depleted psychokinesis quickly return, making her lively and full again. Shinjioli only massaged for 5 or 6 minutes, but she felt as if she had soaked in a hot bath. Her spirit rejuvenated a lot. After the massage, Ning Xuemo got up and moved her arms and legs, feeling unprecedentedly carefree. Thank you. Ning Xuemo couldn't help but say. Having such a master by her side was really her great fortune. You don't have to be so polite with me. Shinjioli looked at her with a smile that wasn't a smile. Quickly leveling up is important, go turn over the stones. No one wanted Ning Xuemo to level up quickly more than the great god, so that he could quickly meet his requirements. Ning Xuemo now understood that the great god brought her here not only to find the moonlight iron, but also to let her gain experience. So she turned over the stones again and fought with the moonlight pterosaur that jumped out. Shinjioli was still playing chess with himself, waiting for her. If she really couldn't win or if she was in danger, he would help her get rid of the opponent. time passed in a cycle of killing monsters, eating, and then killing monsters again, and then again. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. In this half a month, the master and disciple didn't go down the mountain at all. There was nothing faster than leveling up in real combat. In just half a month, Ning Xiaoma's martial arts had increased by 1 level. Now, her with psychokinesis was already at Earth rank level 3. Because she frequently used fire spells to attack, the fire psychokinesis in her body had also increased greatly. After half a month, she also broke through to Earth rank and had the strength of Earth rank level 1. The fireball she released was now the size of a basketball, making the Moonlight Pterosaur have scruples. During this period, Shinjiuli also took advantage of the situation to teach her a few martial arts. There were self-defense skills, offensive skills, and even music hypnosis. There were all kinds of things, and each of them was aimed at making up for the flaws in her battle. The ancestor was indeed a good master. His eyes were like torches, and he could see Ning Xiaoma's subtle mistakes in battle. He could point them out in time to help her correct them, which benefited Ning Xiaoma a lot. Of course, Di Zun didn't serve her for nothing. He took advantage of her every time he taught her martial arts. As a result, Ning Xiaoma's martial arts improved by leaps and bounds, but she was also taken advantage of by Di Zun countless times. There was no one on the peak of Moonlight Mountain. There were only the master and disciple duo and the Moonlight Pterosaur that appeared from time to time. There were no other spectators. Therefore, Di Zun had no qualms about taking advantage of her. He hugged her in his arms and took advantage of her. He took advantage of her in all kinds of ways. In short, except for the last step, Di Zun had already taken advantage of her in every way. There were several times when she almost lost control. Fortunately, Di Zun's self-control was extraordinarily strong. He was able to stop in time and let her go to kill the monsters while he sat quietly to calm the surging heat in his chest. 10 days later, Ning Xiaoma finally killed the first Moonlight Pterosaur with her own ability. At the moment when the Moonlight Pterosaur fell down, the stone in Ning Xiaoma's hand quickly shrank to the size of a fingernail, but it was still shining. It was the Moonlight Iron. She finally found a piece of Moonlight Iron. Although the Moonlight Iron was small and light, she was still very excited to find it with her own hands. She excitedly circled around Shinjiuli several times, as if she was presenting a treasure to him. Chapter 921. Shinjiuli picked it up and looked at it, saying, "It's worth 30,000 crystals. Continue to work hard." He patted her shoulder to encourage her. When his palm fell, Ning Xiaoma's treasured Moonlight Iron had already disappeared without a trace. Needless to say, it had entered his storage space. Although Ning Xiaoma didn't have anything to show off, obtaining the first Moonlight Iron in her life greatly increased her confidence. Once again, she confidently went to turn over the rocks. This Moonlight Iron was indeed extremely difficult to find. After Ning Xiaoma killed the first Moonlight Pterosaur, her speed of killing monsters became faster and faster. The time she spent killing monsters became shorter and shorter. From the original 3 to 4 hours, it became 2 to 3 hours, and then it became 1 hour. With the time she spent killing monsters shortened, the number of monsters she killed on that day naturally increased as well. After another 10 days, she was already able to kill more than 10 monsters a day. However, there was still no trace of the Moonlight Iron. Her fire psychokinesis had risen to Earth rank level 2, and her wood psychokinesis had also risen above Earth rank level 4. She believed that after training for another half a month or 20 days, she would be able to rise to Earth rank level 5. Although there was no trace of the Moonlight Iron, Ning Xiaoma wasn't anxious. This was an excellent place to level up. Even if she found the Moonlight Iron, she didn't want to leave for a while. Moreover, there was the great god accompanying her. With him by her side, she wouldn't encounter any real danger. There were endless kinds of delicious food, so she wouldn't go hungry. When she was exhausted, he would even massage her. After a massage, Ning Xuema couldn't help but sigh. No wonder everyone is racking their brains to worship the great god as their master. The great god really is a good master. She even gave him a thumbs up. Ning Xuema's heart was filled with emotions. Shinjiuli was speechless. Did she think that he taught every disciple like this? How could he have the leisure to do that? Most of them were herding sheep to graze. However, the great god still accepted her sincere praise without reservation. That's natural. There's no better master in this world than me. He then added, I said that I would train you day and night. Naturally, I won't go back on my words. It seemed like when he officially accepted her as his disciple, he already had the intention of bringing her to the Moonlight Mountain to level up. On the 28th day after arriving at Moonlight Mountain, Ning Xuema finally found another piece of moonlight iron the size of a baby's fist. She weighed it in her hand. It was about half a caddy. In other words, with this moonlight iron, she could finally report back to the queen. Ning Xuema seemed to see a large pile of crystals waving at her. She had finally escaped poverty and become rich in this immortal country. I won't be unable to afford a bun anymore. Do you want to continue? Shinjiuli looked at her. Continue. Ning Xuema said without hesitation. There were still 2 days before her appointment with the queen, so she decided to try her luck again. She also wanted to find another piece of moonstone to make something for him. However, in order to accompany her, the Almighty had been playing chess with himself for more than 20 days. Wasn't it too boring? She thought for a moment and said, Almighty, if you're bored, you can go down and take a walk. I'll look for another 2 days. After 2 days, whether I find the moonlight iron or not, I'll go down with you. Shinjiuli tilted his head and looked at her. Are you chasing me away? No. Ning Xuema vowed, I'm just afraid that the great god will be bored. If she played chess with herself for more than 20 days, she would have gone crazy from boredom. Chapter 922. Ning Xuema could now easily kill a moonlight pterosaur. As long as she was careful and didn't provoke a large wave of moonlight pterosaurs, she would be safe. Shinjiuli ignored her and only replied, no. With her by his side, how could he be bored? He even felt a great sense of accomplishment as he watched her power rapidly increase. A month's time was finally up. On the 30th day, the god of luck finally visited her again. She obtained another piece of moonlight iron the size of a goose egg. The faint moonlight flowed on it like a tide, reflecting on Ning Xuema's happy little face, making her pair of bright eyes even more dazzling. Great God, how is this moonlight iron? Ning Xuema ran back to his side with a smile, holding the moonlight iron in her small hand and waving it in front of him. Shinjiuli only glanced at it and made an evaluation. Good iron. This moonlight iron was also divided into purity levels like gemstones. The higher the purity, the more valuable it was, and the brighter its luster. The piece that Ning Xuema had just obtained was very pure. It could be considered an extremely rare item. He looked at the moonlight iron and then looked at her. What are you going to do with this moonlight iron? Ning Xuema shook her finger and kept him in suspense. Heaven's secrets can't be revealed. If she said it in advance, there would be no surprise. She got what she wanted and was very satisfied. After stretching, she hugged Shinjiuli's arm again. Okay, we should go down. Great God, let's go down. A month's time was up. It was time for her to go down and make money. Shinjiuli was very satisfied. Since he and Ning Xuema had reconciled, she was becoming more and more like a child when she was with him. Unintentional physical contact with him was also increasing. The defense she had against him in the depths of her heart was finally disappearing. The two of them still flew over the inky black sea of clouds just like when they went up the mountain. This time, Shinjioli was much more relaxed when he carried her over. First of all, his telekinesis had basically recovered. Secondly, Ning Xuema's internal energy had also greatly improved, so naturally, her body was much lighter. Naturally, it would be easier to fly with him. The two of them landed on the mountain they had come from earlier. Looking back at the Moonlight Mountain, Ning Xuema suddenly felt like she was dreaming. "Guru, let's go back here after I finish my task, okay?" Ning Xuema hugged his arm and refused to let go. This place was too good. Not only could he practice martial arts, he could also make a fortune while he was at it. Shinjioli looked at her sparkling eyes and shook his head. "No, I can't." "Why?" "Don't bite off more than you can chew. You can increase the speed of your training, but you can't be too eager for quick success. Otherwise, it will backfire and harm your body. You should first digest what I have imparted to you." "Fine." Ning Xuema also felt that she had been too impatient. "Alright, then we'll go back after we complete our task." "Good girl." Shinjioli patted her head and kissed her forehead. Just as he was about to take her away, he suddenly sensed something and turned to look to the left. "Who's there?" There was a dense forest on the left. It was silent in the forest, and no one could be seen. Shinjioli waved his sleeve directly into the forest. "Come out." His sleeve was like a flexible whip, and it quickly swept a circle in the dense forest. A whoa! A wolf howled, and a wolf rushed out of the dense forest. It panicked and rushed to the edge of the mountain. It couldn't stop and directly rushed into the black clouds. Chapter 9:23. After the wolf fell into the clouds, it didn't even have time to scream before it melted into nothingness. It turned out that a wolf was coveting them in the forest. Ning Xuema couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Guru, it turns out that you can also be oversensitive." Shinjioli frowned slightly. He vaguely felt that it wasn't a wolf that was coveting them in the forest. He even felt a sharp murderous aura just now. He originally wanted to go deeper into the forest to check it out, but he gave up the idea when he saw Ning Xuema, who was already a little tired. He grabbed her waist and said, "Let's go." He took her to the sky and disappeared in the blink of an eye. A moment later, a faint golden light flashed in the depths of the forest, and a man in red slowly appeared. The setting sun shone on his red robes, making him look like a fire. But for some reason, it gave people a feeling of desolation. He looked at the Moonlight Mountain, and then looked in the direction where Ning Xuema and Shinjioli disappeared. He slowly clenched his fingers. A murderous aura poured out from his body, causing the surrounding plants to wither instantly. 1 month. She actually stayed with him for a month on the mountain. And they never left each other's side. When Ning Xuema was slaying the dragon, she never left Shinjioli's sight. Shinjioli protected her so tightly that he couldn't even get close to her. He didn't want to waste all his previous efforts, so he couldn't show himself. He could only leave quickly and wait on the mountain peak. He knew that it was hopeless even if he waited here, but he didn't want to leave. He didn't want to leave before he saw them come down. They stayed on the mountain for a month, and he also suffered here for a month. When he saw them being so intimate, he almost couldn't control the murderous aura burning in his chest and almost exposed his whereabouts. Fortunately, he prepared a wolf in advance, or else the consequences would be unimaginable. Shinjioli. He whispered with a hint of gnashing teeth, "I won't give her to you in this life." "Never." He fiercely flicked his sleeves, and a golden light flew out. Everywhere it passed, it turned into a barren wasteland. He stretched out his hands, and the black wave zither appeared out of thin air. The other 6 strings were fine, but the 7th string was even redder. The mountain wind blew, and the ghostly cries inside faintly sobbed with the wind. The man in red stretched out a snow-white finger and put it on the string. His sleeves suddenly filled with wind, and fluttered. His handsome face showed a touch of pain, red and blue, as if he was sucking the ghost on the string. After a while, the bright red color of the zither string gradually faded, and the ghostly cries could no longer be heard. His handsome face turned a strange shade of red, but after meditating for a while, it returned to its usual sparkling white color. He gazed into the distance for a moment before his lips curled into a smile. His smile was like a flower blossoms in the spring breeze. Shinjo, you will regret for what you did today. Momo, you will belong to me, and only me. He simply sat on the ground and played the zither. Along with the sound of the zither, he sang, "The sun rises in the east, red clothes like fire." The magnetic voice floated around the mountain peak with the sound of the zither. The queen was going crazy. Her brother Shue had been in seclusion in the secret room for a month. A month. He had never come out. She didn't dare to rush in to see, and didn't even dare to disturb him. She was like an ant on a hot pan. Chapter 924. After a month had passed with great difficulty, the maid sent another piece of good news. She said that the moonlight stone she wanted had finally been taken out by the other party. Now the other party wanted the money and the goods. The queen of course did not dare to be negligent. A gust of wind blew towards the place Ning Xuemo wanted the goods to be delivered, the first tea house. She finally saw Ning Xuemo and Shinjuli again. After not seeing them for a month, she was surprised to find that Ning Xuemo's skills had increased by 2 levels. She focused on the cinnabar mole between Ning Xuemo's eyebrows. That cinnabar mole was bright red. It was originally in the shape of a snowflake, but now it was gradually changing into the shape of a lotus. The queen looked at Shinjuli beside Ning Xuemo. She still could not see him clearly. That person's body seemed to be covered in a layer of invisible smoke, blurring his facial features. Even if she gathered all her energy, it was still useless. She could not deal with this person. Once again, the queen was aware of this. This young lady's skills have increased so quickly. The queen wanted to exchange a few pleasantries first. Ning Xuemo was in a hurry to go back, so she did not want to exchange too much pleasantries with her. She held a piece of moonlight iron in her palm. "Your Majesty, this is the moonlight iron you wanted." The queen's eyes lit up. She raised her hand to take it. Ning Xuemo waved her sleeve and avoided her hand. "I wonder if your Majesty has brought the 40 million crystal beads." The queen was stunned. She coughed and said, "I do have these crystal beads, but there are so many that you can't take them all, right? This king will store the crystal beads in the country's largest bank for you. You can take them whenever you want." She took out a stack of banknotes and handed it over. Ning Xuemo did not take it. "No, I only want the crystal beads, not banknotes." What a joke. This woman was the Immortal Kingdom's king. If she went back on her words, she could just give an order and these banknotes would become useless, turning them into a pile of waste paper. She would not fall for this trick. The queen looked at her. "But there are so many crystals. Where are you going to put them?" 40 million was not a small number. There were hundreds of boxes in total. Ning Xuemo immediately looked at Shinjuli. "Guru." Shinjuli finally opened his mouth and said coolly, "Reveal the crystal." If it were anyone else, the queen would have been furious. However, when she looked at Shinjuli, she knew that she could not afford to offend him. She had no choice but to order people to go to the national treasury to get the crystal beads. 2 hours later, the 500 chests of crystal beads were finally brought over. They were piled high at the entrance of the tea house, attracting countless onlookers. Ning Xuema opened all the boxes and checked them. After confirming that there were no mistakes, she gave the moonstone to her with satisfaction. This kind of transaction naturally attracted a large group of onlookers. Although the citizens of the Immortal Kingdom did not know the truth, when they saw their queen give away such a large sum of money, they still felt pain for her. There were some who were angry, some who were shocked, some who were resentful, and some who scolded her for being a wastrel. The monarchy of this country was clearly not that strict. The citizens who lived here were still very bold. The power of the king was not like the ancient feudal kings who could use their power to kill people. Therefore, the queen's wastrel actions attracted the dissatisfaction of the citizens. There were many discussions in the surroundings. The queen was a little embarrassed. Her beautiful face turned red, but she did not say a word. After Ning Xuema finished counting the crystal beads and handed them over to the moonstone, she turned around and left. "Your Majesty, wait." Ning Xuema suddenly called out to her. "Is there anything else?" The queen turned around. Her tone was not good. Chapter 925. Ning Xuema pointed at the boxes and revealed a faint smile. "Xuema will only keep 200 boxes of these crystal beads. I'll return the rest to your Majesty and treat it as making a new friend." The queen was stunned and the surrounding citizens all sucked in a breath of cold air. She only kept 200 out of the 500 boxes. This meant that she only kept less than 20 million crystal beads and returned the rest for free. The queen finally slowly walked back and gave a deep bow to Ning Xuema. "Many thanks." She took out an exquisite-looking jade tablet from her sleeve and placed it in Ning Xuema's hand. "From today onwards, the two of you are honored guests of the Immortal Kingdom. The two of you can enter and leave the Immortal Kingdom as you wish. All of your expenses can be recorded on this jade tablet." With this jade tablet in hand, Ning Xuema had an endless cash card. She could spend as much as she wanted in the Immortal Kingdom. No matter where she went, she would be treated as an honored guest. The queen left with her subordinates and brought back the 300 large chests along the way. As for the 200 boxes of crystal beads Ning Xuema left behind, they disappeared with a wave of Shinjiuli's sleeve. It was very clear that he had placed them in his storage space. The surrounding citizens finally dispersed. They were originally hostile towards Ning Xuema and Ning Xuema, but after Ning Xuema's actions, their hostility towards her disappeared without a trace. There were even some people who gave their specialty products to Ning Xuema to show their gratitude. After this, Ning Xuema quickly became famous in the Immortal Kingdom. Her name spread through the entire Immortal Kingdom at the speed of light. "You're very smart." Shinjiuli looked at Ning Xuema with eyes full of praise. "That's natural. I'm the smartest." Ning Xuema did not hesitate to accept all of his praise. Although she had lost most of the crystal beads, she had gained the hearts of the people of the Immortal Kingdom. If she really accepted the 40 million crystal beads, she was afraid that she would no longer have a foothold in this place and would be ostracized by all the citizens of the Immortal Country. In that case, what was the point of having 40 million crystal beads? Even if a person spent a lot of money, he wouldn't be able to spend 40 million crystal beads. She might as well do him a favor. Anyway, this 10 million was enough for her to spend as she pleased. There was no need to add another 10 million for long hair. Ning Xuema pulled Shinjiuli to store the crystal beads in the most famous banks of the Immortal Empire. She was already famous, and the shop assistants and shopkeepers in the bank were extremely respectful to her, and they liked her very much. Ning Xuema didn't know that the spiritual energy flowing through these crystals was the key to supporting the Immortal Kingdom's existence. As long as these crystal beads were still in this country, they would be able to exert their power. It didn't care who its owner was. Now that Ning Xuema had stored all of these crystal beads in the Immortal Kingdom's bank, it was clear that she didn't plan on taking them away. Naturally, it wouldn't affect the country's fate, and it wouldn't affect the citizens. All of the citizens let out a sigh of relief, and they were filled with gratitude towards Ning Xuemo and Shinjioli. When Ning Xuemo finished dealing with all of this, it was already night time. She wandered around the city, going from one store to another, and buying some rare things along the way. Since she had the Great God's storage space, she didn't have to worry about not being able to take it all. The citizens of the Immortal Kingdom paid attention to her movements at the beginning, but when they saw that she was only shopping, they gradually lost interest in watching her and stopped paying attention to her. In the end, Ning Xuemo went to the shop of the sword forger. Chapter 926. Ning Xuemo had the Great God drink tea in the outer room while she pulled the blacksmith into the inner room. Then she took out another piece of moonlight iron and told him to make a moonlight flute for her. This was the only gift she could think of for the Great God. The blacksmith happily agreed and put away the moonlight iron. Ning Xuemo left him 50,000 crystal beads as a deposit before coming out with satisfaction. Once this flute was successfully made and she gave it to the Great God, what kind of expression would the Great God have? Ning Xuemo suddenly had some expectations. She walked out with this kind of expectation, but when she saw the scenery outside, she was slightly stunned. The Great God was still sitting there, not moving at all. When Ning Xuemo came in, he was drinking tea in the outer room. But when she came out, she found that he was staring at a flute. That flute was shining, as if it was surrounded by moonlight. It looked beautiful and noble, with a faint mysterious feeling. Moonlight flute. He was actually holding a moonlight flute. Beside him stood a man wearing simple black clothes. He had sharp eyes and a handsome face, but there was a trace of vicissitudes between his eyebrows. "Master!" The blacksmith behind Ning Xuemo called out and quickly walked over. "Why are you here?" His voice was filled with respect. Ning Xuemo couldn't help holding her forehead. There was a disadvantage to the Immortal Kingdom's immortality. You couldn't judge a person's age based on their appearance. The black-clothed man slightly nodded. "Little Luo, you've done well these past few years. You've managed this shop very well." The master and disciple clearly hadn't seen each other for many years, so they chatted for a while. Ning Xuemo learned the identity of the black-clothed man from their conversation. He was the most famous blacksmith in the Immortal Kingdom, a legend at the peak. He didn't take on jobs easily, but when he did, he would definitely make a divine weapon. He used to be the owner of this shop, but 1,000,000 years ago, he gave the shop to his disciple and went to travel. He had just returned this time. And this time, he came here to ask his disciple to help him sell the moonlight flute because he was really too poor, so poor that he almost didn't have enough to eat. While the master and disciple were chatting, Ning Xuemo moved closer to Shinjioli and looked at the moonlight flute. For some reason, her heart suddenly skipped a beat. There was a strange feeling hovering in her heart. Whether it was the style or the length of the flute, it gave her an inexplicably familiar feeling. This was clearly her first time seeing it. The moonlight flute was perfect both in terms of material and shape. Shinjioli used a cleaning spell on the flute. After cleaning the flute completely, he tried to play a few notes. The sound of the flute was clear and serene, like a small stream glistening under the moonlight, slowly flowing out. Ning Xuemo's heart skipped a beat, as if someone was squeezing it. He also felt dizzy for a moment, her body swayed slightly. Shinjioli immediately pulled her to his side and looked at her with a frown. "What's wrong?" When he spoke, the sound of the flute naturally stopped. Ning Xuemo's dizziness finally passed. She rubbed her forehead. "It's probably because I've been too tired these past few days." She was also a bit sleepy. After all, she had fought for so long in the Moonlight Mountain. Now that she relaxed, she couldn't hold on any longer. She looked at the flute again and felt a bit conflicted. great God, do you like this flute a lot? Shinjioli looked at the flute in his hand. He always liked to make his own instruments, so he didn't like any other instruments. Chapter 927. Strangely enough, the moment Shinjioli saw the flute, he felt a strange feeling in his heart. It was a feeling of familiarity and bitterness at the same time. It was an indescribable feeling in his heart. He liked this flute. He liked it the moment he saw it. When he heard Ning Xuemo's question, he nodded slightly. Not bad, I like it. He looked up at the black-clothed swordsmith. Your flute. He was about to ask how many crystals the flute was worth when he saw the expression on the black-clothed swordsmith's face. He frowned. The black-clothed swordsmith stared at Ning Xuemo. His eyes were filled with surprise. His mouth opened and closed. Finally, he said, You're finally here. I've been looking for you all these years. Ning Xuemo, Shinjioli, his disciple, the blue-clothed swordsmith. Master, you. Did you get the wrong person? The black-clothed swordsmith rushed over. Miss, I've been looking for you for 1,000,000 years. After you asked me to make this flute, I've been keeping it with me. I've been waiting for you to come and take it back. I've been waiting for years, but you never came. You never came. I had no choice but to go out and look for you. But I don't know your name or where you came from. He was so excited that he was incoherent. A faint white light appeared in front of him, preventing him from moving forward. Shinjioli's cold voice sounded. You've got the wrong person. Ning Xuemo's face was filled with black lines from his words. 1,000,000 years ago. 1,000,000 years ago, she was just a speck of dust in the universe. Master, you've got the wrong person. Ning Xuemo also spoke up. She looked at the black-clothed swordsmith sympathetically. The black-clothed swordsmith had probably been looking for her for too long. He actually mistook her for someone from 1,000,000 years ago. How pitiful. He had been looking for her for 1,000,000 years, but he was probably hysterical. When Ning Xuemo spoke, the black-clothed swordsmith stopped in his tracks and looked at her in shock. You really aren't her. Ning Xuemo shook her head. I don't know who you're talking about, but I'm definitely not her. She was only 14 years old. How could she be related to a person from 1,000,000 years ago? Even if the way time was calculated here was different from the way she came from, where 1 year was 1 day on the other side, then the 1,000,000 years he spoke of was 3,000 years ago on the other side of the continent. Shinjioli's eyes flickered as they landed on the black-robed swordsmith. The person who asked you to forge this flute 1,000,000 years ago was a woman who looked like her. Are you sure? The black-clothed swordsmith studied Ning Xuemo again. He was also unsure. Judging from her figure and presence, she gives me the feeling that she is. He slightly lowered his eyes and a trace of sadness appeared in the depths of his eyes. At the time, that woman was wearing red clothes and a curtained hat on her head. It covered most of her face, so I couldn't see her clearly. However, that woman really did have a great presence. Even if he couldn't see her face, he could still feel his heart beating wildly the moment he saw her. He couldn't move his eyes away. That woman came alone. She first came to his shop to ask about the moonlight iron. When she found out that this was a priceless item in the immortal country, something that couldn't be bought, she said that she had to obtain the moonlight iron before leaving. 3 months later, that woman finally appeared. She was extremely thin and her body was covered in blood. As soon as she arrived, she fainted in front of his shop. He was the one who saved that woman and brought her back to the shop. Chapter 928. The black-robed swordsmith invited a doctor to examine her and found that there were countless wounds on her body. She had fainted because she had lost too much blood and was too tired and malnourished. The woman was very strong. She only fainted for a moment. Before the black-robed swordsmith could muster up the courage to remove the hat that covered half of her face, she opened her eyes. Her eyes were extremely black and bright, as if they could see into one's heart. The black-robed swordsmith's heart instantly fell for her. The black-robed swordsmith was already famous at that time. Even the queen had to speak to him politely. Therefore, the black-robed swordsmith was very arrogant and did not take anyone seriously. He had never liked other women, but he fell in love with this woman of unknown origins. He felt that it was a gift from the heavens for this woman to faint in front of his door. However, he did not expect that after sending the doctor away, the woman would say something to him that would almost send him to hell. She took out a piece of moonlight iron of excellent quality and asked him to help her make a flute. She said that she wanted to save her husband. The black-robed swordsmith could not believe his ears. The woman looked to be about 15 or 16 years old. He did not expect her to already have a husband. The black-robed swordsmith felt as if he had been hit in the head with a bat. He was speechless for a moment. The woman was clearly prepared. When she took out the moonlight iron, she also took out a piece of paper with a drawing of a flute. The drawing was very detailed. The shape and size were all predetermined. He only needed to make it according to the drawing. The design of the flute was very complicated, and the patterns on it were also very complicated. The black-robed swordsmith was also very knowledgeable. After looking at the design for a while, he blurted out, "This looks a bit like the legendary soul-gathering flute. Could it be that your husband is already dead?" His words stunned the woman for a moment. Then, she nodded. The soul-gathering flute did not look very special on the outside, but the internal structure was very complicated. There could not be a single mistake. It was not easy to make. Once the forging started, the swordsmith had to be completely focused. He could not take on other jobs. It was time-consuming and risky. The black-robed swordsmith looked at the moonlight stone that the woman had risked her life for. He did not dare to take on this job. Besides, apart from the moonlight iron, that woman didn't have a single crystal bead. She simply couldn't afford the deposit. The black-robed swordsmith wanted to refuse, but the woman knelt in front of him and said that she had to save her husband. She said that she had no other way out and begged him to help her. She said that she would think of a way to earn enough crystals to make this moonlight flute, so that he wouldn't work for nothing. After all, the black-robed swordsmith liked her and couldn't bear to see her begging so humbly, so his heart softened and he agreed. Creating this moonlight flute was not an easy task. Even with his ability, it would take him 50 to 60 years to succeed. The woman made a promise with him that she would come back to retrieve it after 60 years. Then, the woman left with injuries. What the black-robed swordsmith didn't expect was that the woman never came back after she left. After he finished forging the flute, he waited year after year. He had been guarding this shop for 1,000 years. In the end, the woman did not appear again. Just like that, the black-robed swordsmith waited until he became obsessed. He really couldn't wait for the woman, so he transferred the shop to his disciple. Then, he took the flute and went out to look for her. However, in the vast sea of people, he didn't know the woman's name or identity. He didn't even see the woman's true appearance. Where could he find her? Chapter 929. Over the years, he had traveled to countless continents and countless countries, but there was no news of that woman. In the beginning, he would often contact his disciple and ask him to keep an eye out for that woman. After repeated disappointment, he finally stopped contacting her so frequently and only contacted her once every 3 to 5 years. He had been wandering until he was penniless. It was only when he was truly in despair that he finally returned to this shop. A million years had passed, and he felt that the woman would definitely not come back. There was a high chance that she had met with some mishap. Although he was sad and regretful, there was nothing he could do. This flute had changed his life and left him with a psychological trauma. Thus, he decided to return to the shop and ask his disciple to find a suitable customer for this flute to sell. He did not expect to find Shinjioli sitting there drinking tea as soon as he entered. He looked like he was leisurely waiting for someone. Although Shinjioli had used a spell to hide his face, his aura was still there. One look and one could tell that he was not an ordinary person. Out of curiosity, he took out the moonlight flute and approached Shinjioli to ask if he was interested in the moonlight flute. Shinjioli was bored waiting outside. When the black-robed swordsmith approached him, he discreetly separated him. When he heard the words moonlight flute, his heart skipped a beat. He was slightly interested and asked the man to take it out to take a look. He had just received it and had not had time to study it when Ning Xuemo came out. This was the black-robed swordsmith's experience. He briefly recounted his experience to Ning Xuemo and Shinjioli. Ning Xuemo and Shinjioli did not take it to heart. There were many people in this world who looked similar. It was not strange that the woman the black-robed swordsmith met looked very similar to Ning Xuemo. Moreover, so much time had passed, and the black-robed swordsmith did not see the woman's appearance clearly. It was not strange that he mistook her for someone else. Ning Xuemo took the moonlight flute in her hand and flipped it around a few times. This toy can gather souls and bring people back to life. To be honest, she didn't quite believe it. She felt a little sorry for that woman. She must have loved her husband dearly. That was why she fought so hard for even the slightest bit of hope. That was why she tried so hard to get the moonlight iron. Ning Xuemo had just come down from Moonlight Mountain, so she naturally knew how difficult it was to find this thing. She didn't feel sad up there because Shinjioli was by her side. But that woman was all alone. Ning Xuemo seemed to be able to imagine the woman killing the Moonlight Pterosaur on the Moonlight Mountain alone, turning over the rocks one by one. It was a pity that Moonlight Xiao, whom she had risked her life for, had never come to take it. Needless to say, she must have met with an accident during this period of time. Perhaps she had gone with her husband. Or perhaps she had been plotted against and died. Ning Xuemo held the moonlight flute in her hand. There was a special feeling in her heart that she didn't want to put down. Great God, do you like it? Ning Xuemo wanted to ask for Shinjioli's opinion first. Shinjioli did not take it to heart. He was not interested in something that a woman had exchanged her life for. Therefore, he shook his head slightly. The black-robed swordsmith looked disappointed. He had mixed feelings about this flute. He did not want to see it again, but he also wanted to find a suitable buyer for it. If the man and woman in front of him bought this flute, it would not be a disgrace to it. He did not expect that the man was not interested. Chapter 930. The black-clothed swordsmith was about to take the flute when Ning Xuemo spoke. How much do you want to sell this flute for? The black-clothed swordsmith was startled. You want to buy it? Ning Xuemo nodded. Give me a price. If it's suitable, I'll buy it. The black-clothed swordsmith was straightforward. This flute was left behind by that girl. She promised to pay me 300,000 crystal beads as a processing fee, but she never came back. Now that you've taken a fancy to it, and you look like her, it proves that this flute is fated to be with you. So, you only need to pay me 300,000 crystal beads as a processing fee. She did not expect this person to be so honest. Ning Xuemo's impression of the black-clothed swordsmith improved. She took out a banknote worth 1 million crystal beads and handed it over. That girl owes you 300,000 crystal beads and made you wait for so long. Plus, you had a hard time finding her, so I'll give you 1,000,000 crystal beads as compensation. 1,000,000 crystal beads was enough for a person to live comfortably until they were old. The black-clothed swordsmith naturally liked it. He faintly felt that Ning Xuemo was that girl's reincarnation. Now that she had accidentally taken back what belonged to her, it was only right for her to do so. Therefore, he agreed. After thanking her profusely, he took the banknote worth 1,000,000 crystal beads. Ning Xuemo kept the flute and called the black-clothed swordsmith over. She whispered a few words to him before she left with Shinjiuli. After Ning Xuemo and Shinjiuli left, the black-clothed swordsmith looked in the direction they disappeared in. Master, if you sell the flute, what if that girl really comes back? The blue-clothed swordsmith was very professional. He did not agree with his master's actions. She should be her. The black-clothed swordsmith suddenly said with certainty. Ha! The blue-clothed swordsmith raised his eyebrows, but she said that you recognized the wrong person. Also, that girl is really young. Her martial arts are not high either. That girl could find the moonlight iron alone that day. Her martial arts must be above the sky level. How can they be the same person? She should be that girl's reincarnation. The black-clothed swordsmith said calmly, I recognize the aura of her soul. It can't be wrong. Now that she has bought the flute, it can be considered returning it to its rightful owner. He yawned, all right, it's late. I should go back. Master, where are you going? Why don't you rest here? The black-clothed swordsmith was reluctant to leave. No need. I have a place to go. He turned to leave. The black-clothed swordsmith is to stay. His master had just made a fortune. With these 1,000,000 crystal beads, no matter what mansion he wanted, he could easily buy it. He wouldn't have to suffer the pain of wandering anymore. It was time for him to have a good rest. Above the cliff swordsmith on. He of as to look as to sit to look as to look ons to pass. The sound of clothes fluttering in the wind came from afar. In the blink of an eye, a black-clothed man ran over. When he was about to reach the red-clothed man, he stopped and bowed, Master. The red-clothed man slowly opened his eyes. His beautiful eyes flashed under the moonlight. How is it? His voice was magnetic and gentle, like an elegant prince. Chapter 931. Young Miss Ning is indeed interested in that flute and has already bought it. The black-clothed man reported. The red-clothed man's eyes flashed slightly and then he nodded. Are you sure she has that flute? The man beside her didn't take it away for her. The black-clothed man revealed a faint smile. He didn't. This subordinate showed it to the man beside her first and only after he saw it did it fall into young Miss Ning's hands, so he naturally wouldn't be suspicious. Moreover, that flute really isn't anything special, so he shouldn't steal it from young Miss Ning's hands. The red-clothed man let out a small breath and then waved his hand. All right, you can leave. The black-clothed man bowed and left, his figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. The red-clothed man slowly stood up and his lips curled into a faint smile. Momo, that was originally yours and now it has finally returned to its rightful owner. I hope you can remember the past soon. I hope you can recover your previous identity. Momo, Momo. He called out this name again and again in a low voice. His voice was filled with joy and pain, as if this name made his heart ache. However, every time he called it, there would be a lingering fragrance. He looked down at the black wave zither in his embrace. He was only one step away. Just one more step and he would succeed. He suddenly sensed something and slightly knit his brows. His body flashed as he disappeared from the large rock. Inside the immortal country's imperial palace. The queen was currently anxiously walking around in circles outside a luxurious house. The door to the luxurious house was tightly shut and there wasn't a single sound coming from inside. Big Brother Shua, I've obtained the moonlight iron. Do you want to come out and take a look? After a while, she said this again outside the door. She lowered her voice out of fear of disturbing the person cultivating inside. Of course, she still did not receive a response from the person inside. Did something happen to him in there? Otherwise, if he heard that the moonlight iron that he had been longing for was in his hands, he should have come out. The queen's heart was burning with anxiety and her palm couldn't help but press against the thin door. She could open this door with a push, but her big brother Shue clearly said that he was not to be disturbed during his closed-door cultivation, otherwise there would be consequences. What should she do? What should she do? She was so anxious that she was like an ant on a hot pan. After calling out several times and going around in circles, she finally couldn't take it anymore. She would gently push open the door and secretly take a look. As long as she was sure that he was fine, she could wait outside with peace of mind. She mustered her courage and pressed her palm on the door again. Just as she was about to push it, the door suddenly opened on its own. A figure in red stood in front of the door and looked at her lazily. Your Majesty. The queen took a step back, and then rushed forward a few steps. She raised her hand to grab his hand. Brother Shue, you scared me to death. I thought you. She didn't finish her words because she grabbed empty air. The man in red simply lifted his sleeve and easily avoided her hand. He took a step back, but his posture was still elegant. Your Majesty, why are you looking for me in such a hurry? A hint of hurt flashed through the queen's eyes. He was neither too close nor too far away from her. That distance was just right. Not only did it not make her fall out with him, it also made her heart itch. She had never been so madly infatuated with a man before. For him, she was willing to risk her life. Normally, she wasn't easy to get along with and was even a little irritable. However, in front of him, she couldn't help but act like a lady.